If you can't handle me sleeping with the CEO and your friends, then leave. They're real men. Not impotent, my wife snapped. I smiled coldly. As you wish. The next morning, my three friends, my wife and her CEO landed in the ER with matching symptoms. Then the doctor entered the room. Guys, this is hard to say, but you know what's funny about loyalty? It's like buying insurance for a house that's already burning down. You keep paying premiums, thinking you're protected, while the flames are literally licking at your ankles. My name is Michael Harland, and at 36 years old, I'd spent the better part of my adult life believing that loyalty was the golden ticket to a decent existence. Turns out, I was about as wrong as a GPS trying to navigate the Bermuda Triangle. For 8 years, I'd been working sanitation for the city of Chicago. Yeah, I know what you're thinking, glamorous, right? Nothing says living the dream like emptying trash cans at 5 a.m. while dodging used condoms and half-eaten pizza slices that probably violated several health codes. But here's the kicker that nobody knew, not even my wife. While I was collecting garbage by day, I was quietly building a crypto fortune that would make most Wall Street bros weep into their overpriced lattes. See, back in 2015, when Bitcoin was cheaper than a decent bottle of wine, I started throwing every spare dollar I could scrape together into various cryptocurrencies. While everyone else was laughing at digital monopoly money, I was studying charts, reading white papers, and basically becoming a financial ninja in my spare time. The beauty of being invisible, which, let's face it, is exactly what you become when you're wearing a city sanitation uniform, is that nobody pays attention to what you're doing with your money. They just assume you don't have any. By 2023, my portfolio was sitting pretty at around $4 million. Not bad for a guy whose job title officially read Waste Management Technician, huh? But did I go around bragging about it? Did I buy a Ferrari and start acting like some crypto bro douchebag? Hell no. I kept my mouth shut, drove my beat-up Honda Civic, and continued living like a normal human being. Because that's what loyal people do. They don't rock the boat, they don't show off, and they sure as hell don't make their partners feel insecure about money. Which brings me to my wife, Celeste. Beautiful, ambitious, and with the emotional depth of a puddle in the Sahara Desert. We'd been married for 6 years, and for most of that time, I genuinely believed we were building something together. She was working on her influencer career, because apparently having opinions about skincare routines and posting thirst traps disguised as lifestyle content is a legitimate profession now, while I provided the steady income and emotional support. Classic arrangement, right? The dependable husband holding down the fort while the wife chases her dreams. Except somewhere along the way, chasing dreams became chasing other men's dicks, and apparently I was too stupid to notice. Or maybe I was just too damn loyal to want to see it. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night in March. I remember it was Tuesday because that's trash pickup day in our neighborhood, and I'd just gotten home from a particularly brutal shift involving what I can only describe as a crime scene disguised as a dumpster behind a seafood restaurant. I was tired, I smelled like low tide mixed with regret, and all I wanted was a shower and maybe some leftover Chinese food. Instead, I walked into what felt like an episode of Jerry Springer directed by Satan himself. Celeste was sitting at our kitchen table, phone in hand, looking like she'd just won the lottery and simultaneously discovered the cure for cancer. That should have been my first red flag. Nobody looks that pleased with themselves unless they're about to drop a bomb that would make Hiroshima look like a firecracker. "We need to talk," she said, which in married couple speak translates to "you're about to get emotionally waterboarded, so buckle up, buttercup." I sat down across from her, still in my work clothes, probably leaving a faint aroma of garbage and broken dreams in my wake. "What's up, babe?" She looked me dead in the eye, and I mean dead, like she was staring at a particularly disappointing piece of roadkill, and delivered the line that would change everything. "If you can't handle me sleeping with the CEO and your friends, then leave. They're real men, not impotent." Now, let me pause here for a second to address that last part. Impotent. Really? That was her big finishing move? I mean, if you're going to gut a man like a fish, at least be creative about it. Impotent is what middle schoolers use when they run out of actually hurtful things to say. But the real kicker wasn't the insult itself. It was the casual way she dropped the bomb about sleeping with multiple people I trusted. The CEO, my friends, plural, as in more than one. For about 30 seconds, I just sat there, processing this information like a computer trying to run Crisis on Windows 95. Part of me wanted to ask for clarification. Which friends, exactly? How long had this been going on? Did they have a group chat where they compared notes about my performance in bed? But another part of me, the part that had been quietly building a crypto empire while taking out the trash, recognized this moment for what it really was. An opportunity. See, here's what Celeste didn't understand about loyalty. It's not weakness. It's not being a pushover or a doormat or whatever other furniture-based metaphor she probably used when talking about me to her new boyfriends. Loyalty is strategic patience. It's gathering information, building resources, and waiting for exactly the right moment to make your move. And brother, she had just given me that moment on a silver platter. Instead of yelling, instead of crying, instead of doing any of the dramatic bullshit she was probably expecting, I smiled. Not a happy smile. More like the kind of smile you'd see on a shark right before it turns a surfer into an all-you-can-eat buffet. As you wish, I said, standing up from the table with the kind of calm that probably should have terrified her. But Celeste was too busy basking in what she thought was her moment of triumph to notice that she'd just declared war on someone who'd spent years learning how to be invisible, patient, and ruthlessly efficient. That night, while she was probably texting her new boyfriends about how she'd finally gotten rid of the dead weight, I sat in my home office and began making lists. Not angry, emotional lists, methodical, military precision lists. Names, addresses, schedules, weaknesses, financial situations, social media accounts, business relationships. My military training from my 20s started whispering in the back of my head like an old friend offering advice. Surveillance, documentation, patience, strategy. Celeste thought she was getting rid of a weak, impotent husband. What she'd actually done was unleash someone who'd spent years quietly learning how to wage war in the shadows. And the best part? She had absolutely no idea what was coming. You know that feeling when you're watching a horror movie and the main character decides to investigate the creepy noise in the basement? That moment where you're screaming at the screen, "Don't go down there, you absolute moron." Well, turns out I was living in my own personal horror flick, except instead of a basement full of demons, I had a life full of backstabbing assholes who I'd stupidly considered family. It wasn't just Celeste. Oh no, that would have been too simple, too clean. Like finding out your dentist has been overcharging you versus discovering your entire medical team has been harvesting your organs while you sleep. The betrayal ran deeper than a Kardashian's fake tan, and it involved pretty much every person I'd trusted over the past decade. Let me paint you a picture of my personal Judas collection, starting with Dean Matthews. This guy was supposed to be my brother from another mother, the kind of friend you call when you need help moving a couch or hiding a body. Not that I'd ever actually hidden a body, but you get the metaphor. Dean owned CrossFit Revolution downtown, one of those places where people pay obscene amounts of money to lift heavy things and then post about it on Instagram like they've just discovered fire. I'd met Dean 6 years ago when I was going through what I now recognize as a midlife crisis disguised as a fitness journey. You know the drill. 30-year-old man suddenly realizes he's shaped like a deflated balloon animal and decides to do something about it. Dean was the trainer who helped me transform from guy who gets winded walking upstairs to guy who can actually see his own feet without a mirror. We bonded over shared workouts, weekend barbecues, and what I thought was genuine friendship. Turns out, Dean's definition of brotherhood included screwing my wife behind my back while I was out collecting garbage to pay for the gym membership that was keeping me in shape for her enjoyment. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a protein shake. Then there was Tyler Morrison, my crypto trading buddy who I'd helped get started in the digital currency game back when he thought blockchain was something you used to secure a bicycle. This dude owed me everything, and I mean everything. When he was living in his mom's basement, subsisting on ramen noodles and false hope, I was the one who walked him through his first Bitcoin purchase. I shared my research, my strategies, my hard-earned knowledge about market patterns and trading psychology. Fast forward to 2023, and Tyler was pulling in 6 figures a year trading crypto, living in a downtown loft that probably cost more per month than most people's annual salary. He'd transformed from basement-dwelling neckbeard to slick financial wizard, complete with the kind of designer wardrobe that screams, "I have more money than sense." And how did he thank me for jump-starting his entire career? by joining my wife's little harem while probably using profits from strategies I taught him to buy her expensive gifts. The third musketeer in this circus of betrayal was Malik Rodriguez, a real estate hustler who I'd literally saved from financial ruin 3 years ago. Malik was the kind of guy who could sell ice to Eskimos and somehow make them feel grateful for the privilege. He specialized in flipping houses in up-and-coming neighborhoods, riding the wave of gentrification like some kind of capitalist surfer. But even the smoothest talkers sometimes bite off more than they can chew, and Malik had gotten himself into a situation involving a property deal gone wrong, some very unhappy investors, and what I suspected were connections to people who solved business disputes with crowbars rather than lawyers. When he came to me, desperate and scared, I didn't hesitate to lend him 50 grand from my crypto stash to make his problems disappear. Did I ask for a contract? Nope. Did I demand collateral? Hell no. Because that's what friends do for each other, right? They help without keeping score. They trust without documentation. They believe in each other even when logic suggests otherwise. Malik paid me back within 6 months, plus interest, and I thought that was the end of it. Just a friend helping a friend through a rough patch. What I didn't realize was that I'd apparently purchased a premium membership to the Let's All Bang Michael's Wife Club, with Malik as one of the founding members. And then there was the ring leader himself, Victor Langford, CEO of Apex Fitness Empire, a guy who'd built his fortune selling overpriced gym equipment and supplements to people desperate enough to believe that six-pack abs could be purchased rather than earned. Victor was the kind of man who wore suits that cost more than most people's cars, drove a Lamborghini like it was a civic duty, and treated women like collectible trading cards. He was also Celeste's boss, technically speaking. She'd started working for Apex as a brand ambassador, which as far as I could tell involved posting workout videos and sports bras that could double as dental floss and attending company events where she smiled pretty for investors. It was supposed to be her big break into the influencer world, her chance to build the kind of personal brand that would make her independently wealthy and famous. What I didn't know was that Victor's hiring process apparently included a very thorough orientation period that had nothing to do with company policies and everything to do with his personal entertainment. He saw my wife as just another trophy to add to his collection, another conquest to brag about in whatever rich guy locker rooms he frequented. The worst part? They all knew about each other. This wasn't a case of multiple affairs happening in isolation. This was a coordinated effort, a group project in humiliation. They had group chats where they joked about me, called me the furniture husband, because I was always there but never really noticed. Victor bragged about breaking in my wife like a company car, treating her like some kind of lease vehicle that he could test drive whenever the mood struck. My so-called friends joked about how clueless I was, how I'd never figure out what was happening right under my nose. They made bets about how long it would take me to catch on, shared stories about close calls when I almost walked in on something, laughed about the elaborate lies they had to construct to keep me in the dark. Every message I later discovered felt like a paper cut to the soul. Not because they were sleeping with my wife. Honestly, by that point I was more offended by her taste in men than anything else. But because of the casual cruelty, the complete lack of respect, the way they'd turned my trust into entertainment. Dean, who I'd spotted at the gym, who I'd helped through his own relationship problems, who'd been to my house for dinner countless times. Tyler, who owed his entire career to my guidance and support. Malik, who I'd literally saved from financial ruin. And Victor, who'd never met a boundary he wouldn't cross if it meant adding another notch to his designer belt. They thought they were so clever, so sophisticated, pulling one over on the dumb garbage man who was too stupid to see what was happening in his own marriage. They underestimated one crucial thing. Invisible doesn't mean powerless. That night, as I sat in my home office surrounded by evidence of their betrayal, I wasn't thinking about revenge in the traditional sense. I was thinking about justice, about consequences, about teaching some very expensive lessons to people who clearly needed their education updated. Military training had taught me that the best battles are won before the enemy even realizes they're at war. Here's something they don't teach you in marriage counseling. When your entire world implodes, you have two choices. You can either lose your shit like a contestant on a reality TV show, or you can channel your inner Navy SEAL and start planning the most methodical takedown since the Watergate investigation. Guess which route I chose? Instead of rage, I chose precision. Instead of screaming matches and thrown dishes, I went full-on Jason Bourne. Except instead of fighting international assassins, I was collecting evidence on a bunch of idiots who thought they were smarter than the invisible garbage man. My military training, which had been gathering dust in the back of my brain like an old exercise bike, suddenly came roaring back to life with the clarity of a church bell. The Army had taught me 3 fundamental principles that applied perfectly to civilian warfare: surveil, document, wait. It's like the holy trinity of revenge, except instead of salvation, you get the sweet satisfaction of watching your enemies destroy themselves with their own stupidity. First step, surveillance. Now, when most people think surveillance, they picture some guy in a van with binoculars and a thermos full of cold coffee. But modern surveillance is way more sophisticated and infinitely more satisfying. We live in the golden age of digital stupidity, where people document their own crimes and post them on social media like they're applying for awards in the worst human being category. I started with their phones. Not hacking. I'm not some basement-dwelling cybercriminal. I'm talking about good old-fashioned social engineering mixed with the kind of access you get when people trust you enough to leave their devices lying around. Amazing how much incriminating evidence people keep on devices they think are private, especially when those people are arrogant enough to believe they're untouchable. Dean was the easiest target because the guy's password security was about as strong as wet toilet paper. His gym required members to connect to the Wi-Fi, and since I'd helped him set up the network originally, I knew exactly how to monitor traffic. Every text, every photo, every late-night video call with my wife. All of it flowing through systems I had legitimate access to maintain. Tyler was trickier because crypto traders tend to be more paranoid about digital security, but paranoia doesn't help when you're stupid enough to use the same coffee shop Wi-Fi every morning to check your personal accounts. 3 weeks of patient observation, and I had enough screenshots to make a coffee table book titled How to Destroy Your Life in 140 Characters or Less. Malik was practically handing me evidence on a silver platter. The guy was so obsessed with documenting his lifestyle on Instagram that he was essentially providing a real-time itinerary of when and where he was cheating on his girlfriend with my wife. Nothing says criminal mastermind like posting time-stamped photos of yourself outside a hotel you're definitely not supposed to be at. But the real goldmine was their group chat. Oh, sweet Jesus. Their group chat was like Christmas morning wrapped in a birthday party and delivered by unicorns. These geniuses had created a private messaging group where they shared photos, videos, and detailed commentary about their adventures with Celeste. They called it the furniture store, get it? Because I was the furniture husband. Hilarious, right? Really showcasing that Ivy League creativity. In this digital treasure trove of stupidity, Victor bragged about breaking in my wife like a company car, complete with photos that would have made a porn director blush. Dean shared workout videos that definitely weren't focused on proper form. Tyler posted crypto trading tips mixed with intimate details that I really didn't need to know, but was absolutely going to use against him. And Malik? Malik was documenting real estate deals that suddenly made a lot more sense when you realized they involved properties where he was taking my wife for private showings. Every message was another nail in their collective coffin, another piece of evidence that would come in handy when the time was right. They thought they were so clever, so untouchable, sharing their conquest like fraternity brothers comparing notes after a kegger. What they didn't realize was that they were essentially creating a prosecutor's wet dream, a comprehensive record of their own destruction. The beauty of digital evidence is that it's persistent. Delete a message? Doesn't matter. I'd already screenshotted it. Clear your browser history? Too late, buddy. I'd already captured those hotel booking confirmations. Try to cover your tracks? Sorry, but when you're dealing with someone who understands how technology actually works, your amateur hour privacy measures are about as effective as a chocolate teapot. While I was building my evidence portfolio, I was also making physical preparations. I rented a small apartment across town under a business name I'd registered years ago for crypto trading. Nothing fancy, just a basic one-bedroom that could serve as a command center, complete with multiple laptops, backup drives, and enough coffee to fuel a small army. Think of it as my personal war room. Except instead of planning military operations, I was orchestrating the downfall of people who richly deserved what was coming. The apartment also served as storage for equipment I'd need later. Recording devices small enough to hide in plain sight, GPS trackers that could be discreetly attached to vehicles, and surveillance cameras that could be disguised as everyday objects. All perfectly legal to purchase, all completely undetectable when used properly, all devastatingly effective when deployed by someone who actually knew what they were doing. But hardware was only half the equation. The real weapon was going to be human intelligence, and for that, I needed an inside ally. Someone with access to places I couldn't go, someone with skills I didn't have, someone with their own reasons for wanting to see justice done. That's when I remembered Tamara Lee. Tamara was a former medical technician who'd gotten screwed over by the healthcare system in ways that would make your blood boil. She'd been working at Chicago General, pulling night shifts and saving lives, when budget cuts and administrative politics had forced her out of a career she'd trained years for. Now she was working at a coffee shop downtown, serving overpriced lattes to people who made more in a day than she used to make in a month. But here's the thing about Tamara. She owed me a favor. A big one. About 2 years ago, when she was going through her own financial crisis after losing her hospital job, I'd helped her avoid eviction by covering 3 months of rent. Not as a loan, as a gift. Because that's what decent people do when they see someone struggling through no fault of their own. I'd stayed in touch with Tamara, checking in periodically to make sure she was doing okay, never expecting anything in return. Just basic human decency, the kind of behavior that apparently makes you a sucker in today's world. But now, as I sat in my new command center surrounded by evidence of betrayal, I realized that sometimes doing the right thing pays dividends in ways you never expect. Tamara had medical training, access to laboratory equipment through her current job's connections, and most importantly, a legitimate reason to be angry at people who thought they were better than everyone else. She was perfect for what I had in mind. The plan was starting to come together, piece by methodical piece. You know what they say about gift horses and looking them in the mouth? Well, sometimes the universe delivers exactly what you need wrapped up in such a perfect bow that you'd be stupid not to take it. And brother, what Celeste handed me next was like Christmas, my birthday, and winning the lottery all rolled into one beautifully ironic package. It was a Wednesday morning in early April when my darling wife came bouncing into the kitchen like a caffeinated cheerleader who'd just discovered the meaning of life. She was practically vibrating with excitement, clutching her phone like it contained the secrets to eternal youth and unlimited Instagram followers. Which, knowing Celeste, it probably did. "Michael, honey," she said, and I knew immediately that whatever was coming next was going to be either expensive or stupid, possibly both. When your wife starts a sentence with honey, in that particular tone, it's like hearing the Jaws theme song. You know something's about to bite you in the ass. "I have the most amazing idea for growing my brand," she continued, completely oblivious to the fact that her brand was currently built on sleeping with half the city's male population. "Victor thinks it would be perfect for Apex Fitness, and all the guys are totally on board." Now, when she said, all the guys, I knew exactly which guys she was talking about. Dean, Tyler, Malik, and Victor, the founding members of the Let's Screw Michael's Wife Club. But I just smiled and nodded like the supportive husband I was pretending to be, waiting to hear what brilliant scheme they'd cooked up this time. "We're going to launch a men's health awareness campaign," she announced, like she'd just discovered the cure for cancer. "Think about it. It's socially conscious, it's timely, and it's exactly the kind of content that goes viral. We'll do health screenings, educational content, maybe even partner with local hospitals for authenticity." I had to hand it to her. For someone whose idea of medical knowledge came from Googling detox teas and waist trainers, she'd stumbled onto something that was actually socially useful. Men's health awareness was a legitimate cause, something that could genuinely help people while also generating the kind of positive publicity that influencers live for. But here's where it got interesting. As she kept talking, gesticulating wildly with her phone, and occasionally pausing to take selfies to document this creative breakthrough, I realized that she was basically handing me the perfect cover for what I had planned. "Victor's company will sponsor the whole thing," she continued, completely unaware that she was essentially writing my script for me. "Dean's gym will be the location. Tyler's going to handle the social media marketing because he's so good with online engagement, and Malik knows people in the medical field who can help with the actual testing." It was like watching someone build their own gallows while humming a happy tune. Every detail she shared was another piece falling perfectly into place for my master plan. They wanted to do health screenings? Perfect. They wanted medical professionals involved? Even better. They wanted to make it a big public event with lots of documentation and social media coverage? Outstanding. But the real cherry on top came when Celeste added. And of course, I'll be participating too. I mean, we should practice what we preach, right? Plus, it'll be great for the optics, showing that this isn't just about men's health, but about health awareness in general. I swear, if I'd been drinking coffee at that moment, I would have choked on it. Not from surprise, but from trying not to laugh out loud. She was literally volunteering to be included in something that could potentially expose all of them, and she thought it was a marketing strategy. That sounds amazing, babe, I said, putting on my best supportive husband voice. Really innovative. I'm proud of you for thinking of something so meaningful. And I genuinely was proud, in a twisted sort of way. She'd managed to create the perfect scenario for her own downfall without even realizing it. It was like watching someone enthusiastically dig their own grave while live streaming the process for their followers. Over the next few days, I watched as the whole group threw themselves into planning this campaign with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for cult activities or pyramid schemes. Dean was excited about showcasing his gym as a health-focused community space. Tyler was already designing social media graphics and planning influencer outreach. Malik was leveraging his real estate connections to find medical professionals who might want to participate. And Victor? Victor was just basking in the glow of what he thought would be another publicity win for Apex Fitness. Meanwhile, I was having daily conversations with Tamara, fine-tuning the details of how we could turn their awareness campaign into something far more educational than they'd bargained for. Tamara still had connections in the medical field, people who owed her favors or respected her enough to help with what she thought was a legitimate health initiative. The beauty of it, Tamara said during one of our planning sessions at her coffee shop, is that we'll be conducting real tests using real equipment. Everything will be completely legitimate from a medical standpoint. We're just going to be very creative about how we interpret and present the results. See, here's something most people don't understand about medical testing. It's all about context and presentation. The same test results can tell very different stories depending on how they're framed, what additional factors are considered, and how the information is communicated to the patient. A skilled medical professional can take perfectly normal results and present them in a way that would make a hypochondriac reach for their emergency Xanax. Not that we were planning to fake anything. That would be illegal, unethical, and completely unnecessary. What we were planning was far more elegant. We were going to give them exactly what they asked for, just with a few additional layers of complexity that they weren't expecting. The Men's Health Awareness campaign was scheduled for the first week of May, giving us about 3 weeks to prepare. 3 weeks to set up equipment, coordinate with medical professionals, and make sure every single detail was perfect. Because when you're dealing with people who think they're smarter than everyone else, you don't get second chances. During those 3 weeks, I watched my wife and her boy toys planning their event with the kind of naive enthusiasm that would have been adorable if it weren't so misguided. They created promotional materials, reached out to local media, and even managed to get some legitimate health organizations to endorse the campaign. They thought they were building something meaningful, something that would enhance their reputations and advance their careers. What they were actually doing was constructing the stage for their own very public humiliation. And the best part? They were doing all the work themselves. I just had to sit back, smile supportively, and make sure everything went exactly according to plan. The irony was so perfect it was almost artistic. If you've ever been to a high school reunion, you know that special kind of energy that fills the air when people are trying way too hard to impress each other. Now imagine that same energy. But instead of, look how successful I am 20 years later, it's look how healthy and socially conscious I am while secretly screwing my friend's wife. That was the vibe at CrossFit Revolution on the morning of May 6th, the day that would go down in my personal history as the day everything went according to plan. The gym had been transformed into what looked like a legitimate medical facility, crossed with a social media content creator's wet dream. Tamara and her team had set up testing stations that would have made a real hospital jealous. Blood pressure monitors, portable blood testing equipment, body composition analyzers, and enough medical-looking machinery to convince anyone that this was the real deal. Which, technically it was. We weren't cutting any corners on the actual medical side of things. We were just being very creative about what we planned to do with the results. Dean arrived first, because of course he did. The man couldn't resist being the center of attention at his own gym, strutting around in shorts that were probably more expensive than most people's rent, flexing for anyone with a camera or pulse. He'd spent the better part of the previous week promoting the event on social media, posting shirtless workout videos with captions about taking charge of your health and being a real man means getting tested. The irony was so thick you could have used it as protein powder. "Bro, this is going to be epic," he kept saying to anyone who would listen, flexing his biceps every few words like he had some kind of neurological condition that required constant muscle contractions. "We're really making a difference here, you know? Changing lives, raising awareness, being leaders in the community." Yeah, Dean, real leaders. The kind who sleep with their friends' wives while preaching about integrity and brotherhood. Tyler showed up about 20 minutes later, looking like he'd stepped out of a crypto trading magazine. If such a thing existed, which honestly, it probably does. Designer everything, perfectly styled hair, and that particular brand of confidence that comes from making obscene amounts of money doing something most people don't understand. He immediately started taking selfies with the medical equipment, probably planning to post them later with captions about investing in health and diversifying your portfolio of wellness. "This is brilliant marketing," he told Celeste, who was practically glowing from the attention. "The engagement metrics on this are going to be insane. I'm seeing brand partnerships, sponsored content, maybe even a documentary deal if we play this right." Malik rolled up fashionably late, because punctuality is apparently for poor people. He was driving his latest acquisition, a Tesla Model S that he'd probably bought with profits from real estate deals that may or may not have been entirely legal. The man had a gift for making everything look effortless, from his perfectly pressed casual wear to the way he seemed to glide rather than walk. He was already working the room before he'd even officially arrived, shaking hands and networking like this was a chamber of commerce meeting instead of a health screening. "Michael, my man," he called out when he spotted me cleaning equipment in the background. "This whole thing is incredible. Your wife is a genius, absolutely brilliant. We should talk about doing something similar for some of my property developments, community health initiatives, you know? Great for property values and public relations." I smiled and nodded, playing my role as the supportive background husband while internally calculating exactly how much his life was about to change. "Yeah, she's really something special," I replied, which was technically true, just not in the way he thought I meant it. And then Victor made his grand entrance, because the man couldn't just arrive somewhere. He had to make an event out of it. Lamborghini purring like a mechanical cat, custom suit that probably cost more than most people's annual salary, and that particular aura of entitlement that comes from having enough money to believe that normal rules don't apply to you. He stepped out of his car like he was walking a red carpet, immediately drawing the attention of everyone in the vicinity. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced to no one in particular, "the future of fitness and health awareness has arrived." Because apparently humility was another thing he couldn't afford despite his considerable wealth. Victor spent the next 30 minutes glad-handing everyone in sight, taking photos with community leaders who'd shown up for the event, and generally acting like he'd personally invented the concept of preventive healthcare. He kept one arm around Celeste whenever possible, and I had to admire his balls, openly claiming my wife in front of me while I was standing right there. It takes a special kind of arrogance to be that blatant about your affairs. But the real performance art began when the actual testing started. Dean was first up, naturally, stripping down to his underwear for body composition analysis while flexing for the cameras that Celeste was using to document everything. "Gotta show people that fitness isn't just about looking good," he said, while absolutely showing off how good he looked. "It's about being healthy inside and out." Tyler was next, joking with the medical technicians about how his high-stress trading lifestyle probably meant he needed to pay extra attention to his cardiovascular health. "Money's no good if you're not alive to spend it," he quipped, which would have been funnier if he weren't actively contributing to my stress levels by sleeping with my wife. Malik treated his screening like a business networking opportunity, chatting up everyone in Scrubs about potential real estate investments in the medical field. "Healthcare real estate is the future," he kept saying. Always going to be demand, always going to be profits. It's recession-proof. And Victor? Victor turned his entire screening into a photo opportunity, making sure every angle was captured for future marketing materials. This is what leadership looks like, he announced to Celeste's camera. A CEO who doesn't just talk about employee wellness, but demonstrates it personally. Meanwhile, I moved through the background like a ghost, wiping down equipment, restocking supplies, and making sure everything ran smoothly. The invisible man doing invisible work while the stars of the show preened and posed for their audience. No one paid attention to the janitor making sure their precious event didn't fall apart, which was exactly how I wanted it. Because while they were busy performing for the cameras and stroking their own egos, I was watching every detail, noting every interaction, and making sure that everything went exactly according to the plan that none of them knew existed. The best part? They were having so much fun, so convinced of their own brilliance and importance, that they had no idea they were participating in their own downfall. It was beautiful to watch. You know that moment in a disaster movie when everything seems fine, people are going about their business, and then suddenly the ground starts shaking? That's exactly what the next 72 hours felt like, except instead of earthquakes or alien invasions, it was watching 5 people's lives implode in real time while I maintained the perfect poker face of a concerned, supportive husband. The results started rolling in on Thursday morning, exactly 48 hours after the screenings. Tamara had done her job with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker, and the medical lab she'd partnered with was as legitimate as they come. Everything was completely by the book, professionally handled, and absolutely devastating in its implications. Dean was the first domino to fall, which was poetic justice considering he'd been the first to volunteer for testing. His phone rang at 8:47 a.m. while he was in the middle of leading a CrossFit class, barking orders at a group of soccer moms who were paying premium prices to be yelled at while lifting heavy objects. I know the exact time because I happened to be in the gym, doing my usual maintenance work on the equipment, when his entire world came crashing down. This can't be right, he said into his phone, his voice carrying across the gym with the kind of panic that makes everyone stop what they're doing. There has to be some kind of mistake. I'm healthy. I eat clean. I work out 6 days a week. I take supplements worth more than most people's grocery budgets. The class he'd been teaching just stood there holding their kettlebells, watching their supposedly invincible trainer turn the color of week-old lettuce. Dean kept pacing around in circles, running his free hand through his perfectly styled hair while repeating variations of "this can't be happening," like a broken record stuck on the world's worst song. I need to come in immediately, he finally managed. Can we run the tests again? Maybe there was contamination, or a mix-up, or... His voice trailed off as whatever the person on the other end was telling him apparently confirmed his worst fears. By the time Dean hung up, half his morning class had already gathered their stuff and left. Nothing kills the motivation for a workout quite like watching your trainer have what appears to be a medical emergency in real time. The remaining soccer moms were whispering among themselves, probably wondering if whatever Dean had was contagious and whether they should demand refunds. Tyler got his call about an hour later, while he was in the middle of a live-stream trading session from his downtown loft. I wasn't there to witness it personally, but thanks to the magic of social media and Tyler's habit of broadcasting his entire life online, I got to watch the whole meltdown from the comfort of my own home. One minute he was explaining cryptocurrency market trends to his audience with his usual cocky confidence, gesturing at multiple monitors displaying charts that looked like modern art created by caffeinated spiders. The next minute, his phone rang, and his face went from master of the universe to deer caught in headlights, faster than a Tesla in ludicrous mode. "I'm sorry, folks," he stammered to his camera, his usual smooth delivery replaced by the verbal equivalent of a car with engine trouble. I have to end the stream early today." But Tyler being Tyler, he forgot to actually end the stream. So his audience got to watch him pace around his apartment, pale and sweating, having what sounded like the exact same conversation Dean had earlier. The chat was going crazy with speculation. Everything from Tyler's having a breakdown, to this is viral marketing for a new crypto coin, to someone call 911, he looks like he's dying. By the time Tyler remembered he was still broadcasting and cut the feed, Clips of his meltdown were already making their way around crypto Twitter with hashtags like #TylerDown and #CryptoMeltdown. The internet moves fast when there's drama to be consumed. Malik's world started crumbling around noon, right in the middle of what was supposed to be a high-stakes real estate closing. He was at some upscale law office downtown, probably wearing a suit that cost more than most people's cars, when his phone buzzed with the call that would change everything. I found out about this one secondhand through the Real Estate Gossip Network, which moves faster than CNN breaking news when there's juicy drama to share. Apparently, Malik excused himself from the conference room to take what he thought would be a quick call, only to return looking like he'd seen his own ghost. "Gentlemen, I apologize," he reportedly told the room full of lawyers, investors, and other real estate vultures. "There's been a family emergency. We'll need to reschedule." Except there was no family emergency, unless you count Malik's life falling apart as a family crisis, which I suppose it technically was. The deal he walked away from was worth 7 figures, and in the real estate world, you don't walk away from 7-figure deals unless someone's literally dying or you're about to be arrested. Victor's call came last, at 2:30 p.m., while he was in the middle of a board meeting at Apex Fitness headquarters. This I know because Celeste was there for some kind of brand ambassador photo shoot, and she came home that evening with all the details, completely oblivious to the bigger picture she was painting. "It was so weird," she told me over dinner, picking at a salad that probably cost more than most people spend on groceries in a week. Victor was in this really important meeting with investors, talking about expansion plans and new franchise opportunities, when his assistant interrupted with some urgent phone call. According to Celeste, Victor tried to play it cool at first, taking the call in his office while the board waited. But whatever he heard on that call hit him like a freight train carrying bad news and personal regret. He came back into the meeting looking absolutely terrible, Celeste continued, completely missing the irony of her choice of words. Pale, sweaty, like he'd seen a ghost or something. He tried to laugh it off, made some joke about needing to pay better attention to his health, but you could tell something was really wrong. The meeting apparently ended early, with Victor making excuses about feeling under the weather and needing to reschedule. The investors left looking confused and probably concerned about their money, while Victor locked himself in his office for the rest of the day. But here's where it gets really interesting. Within hours of getting their individual calls, all 4 of them started experiencing what they described as matching symptoms. Weakness, fever, cold sweats. The kind of physical manifestations that happen when your brain starts believing your body is in serious trouble. It's amazing how powerful the mind-body connection can be when you give it something concrete to worry about. Tell someone they might have a serious health problem, and suddenly every minor ache becomes a potential symptom. Every moment of fatigue becomes evidence of impending doom. By Thursday evening, Dean had closed his gym early, claiming he felt too sick to work. Tyler had canceled all his trading activities and social media appearances. Malik had postponed 3 property showings and a networking event. And Victor had delegated all his meetings to subordinates while he dealt with a personal health matter. The beautiful part was watching them try to reach each other, probably wanting to compare notes or seek reassurance, while simultaneously being too proud or scared to admit what was happening. It was like watching a game of telephone played by people who were all too terrified to actually pick up the phone. And through it all, I maintained my role as the concerned, supportive husband, offering to help Celeste deal with the stress of seeing her friends and business associates going through health scares. The dominoes were falling exactly as planned. There's something deeply satisfying about hospital waiting rooms when you're not the one waiting for bad news. It's like watching a really intense drama unfold in real time. Except instead of Netflix, you're getting front row seats to karma finally cashing some overdue checks. And brother, Friday afternoon at Stark Memorial Hospital was better than any streaming service could ever hope to be. By noon, all 5 of them had collapsed under what their panicked minds had convinced them were life-threatening symptoms. It started with Dean, who'd apparently fainted during what was supposed to be a private training session with one of his wealthier clients. Nothing says professional fitness expert quite like face planting in front of someone who pays you $300 an hour to tell them how to lift things properly. Tyler was next, collapsing in his downtown loft while frantically Googling his symptoms and probably wondering if his crypto portfolio would survive without him. His neighbor found him hyperventilating on his balcony, convinced he was having some kind of cardiac event. The irony of a guy who spent his days analyzing market volatility being completely unable to handle his own personal crash was not lost on me. Malik's breakdown happened at a Starbucks of all places, which seemed fitting for someone whose entire personality was built around overpriced lifestyle choices. He'd been meeting with a potential client about some high-end property development when he suddenly turned gray and started sweating like he was in a sauna. The client probably thought it was the worst sales pitch in real estate history. Victor, being Victor, managed to make even his collapse dramatic. He was in his office at Apex Fitness, probably staring at himself in one of the many mirrors he'd installed to fuel his narcissism, when he decided he needed immediate medical attention. Instead of calling 911 like a normal person, he had his assistant arrange for a private ambulance because even medical emergencies needed to maintain his image of wealth and importance. And Celeste? My darling wife had worked herself into such a state of sympathetic panic watching her boy toys fall apart that she convinced herself she was experiencing symptoms too. I feel feverish, she kept telling me, despite the thermometer showing a perfectly normal temperature. And weak. And my heart's racing. What if we all caught something at the health screening? What if the equipment wasn't properly sterilized? I played my role perfectly, the concerned husband driving his worried wife to the hospital to get checked out just to be safe. Because that's what supportive spouses do, right? They drop everything to rush their partners to medical facilities when they're convinced they're dying from mysterious illnesses. The emergency room at Stark Memorial was like a reunion from hell when we arrived. Dean was already there, sitting in a wheelchair looking like he'd aged 10 years in 2 days. Tyler was pacing back and forth, still pale but animated enough to be scrolling through his phone, probably checking crypto prices out of habit. Malik was slumped in a corner chair, having what appeared to be a very heated phone conversation with someone about rescheduling his entire week. And Victor? Victor was holding court in the middle of the waiting area, talking loudly to anyone who would listen about how he needed the best doctors available and how money was no object when it came to his health. Because even in a hospital gown, the man couldn't resist trying to establish his superiority over everyone around him. The sight should have broken me. These were people I'd trusted, people I'd considered family, people who'd been part of my life for years. Seeing them scared and vulnerable should have triggered some kind of sympathy response, some residual affection from the relationships we'd once had. Instead, it steadied me like a shot of premium whiskey on a cold day. They looked at each other with a mixture of fear and confusion, probably wondering if this was some kind of cosmic coincidence or if they'd all been exposed to something during the health screening. None of them seemed to suspect that their mysterious illness might be connected to their shared hobby of screwing the same man's wife. The really beautiful part was watching them try to avoid making eye contact with me. Dean kept looking at his shoes like they contained the secrets of the universe. Tyler was suddenly fascinated by whatever was happening on his phone screen. Malik had developed an intense interest in the motivational posters on the hospital walls. And Victor kept checking his expensive watch as if time itself could rescue him from this situation. Only Celeste seemed genuinely confused about why everyone was acting so weird. "Why is everyone being so quiet?" she whispered to me, apparently oblivious to the elephant herd that had taken up residence in the waiting room. "We're all here because we're worried about our health. Shouldn't we be supporting each other? Supporting each other. Right. Because nothing says mutual support quite like a group of men who've been secretly coordinating their affairs with the same woman while mocking her husband in group chats. The tension in that waiting room was thicker than the plot of a soap opera written by someone on a 3-day caffeine bender. You could practically see the guilt radiating off them like heat waves, mixing with their genuine fear about what the doctors were going to tell them. Dr. Patricia Harrison arrived about 20 minutes later, looking like the kind of medical professional who'd seen every possible form of human stupidity and wasn't impressed by any of it. She was carrying a stack of files that I knew contained the test results that would either confirm their worst fears or provide some relief from the psychological torture they'd been putting themselves through. "I need to speak with all of you," she announced, her voice carrying the kind of authority that made everyone in the waiting room sit up straighter. "About your test results from the health screening." The silence that followed was so complete you could have heard a pin drop in the next county. 5 people holding their breath, waiting to hear whether their lives were about to change forever, while I sat there in my maintenance uniform, still playing the role of the invisible husband who just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Dr. Harrison looked around the room, making eye contact with each of them in turn. I have to say, this is unusual. In 20 years of practicing medicine, I've never seen results quite like these from a group screening. Dean's hands were shaking. Tyler had gone completely pale. Malik was gripping the arms of his chair like he was trying to prevent himself from floating away. Victor was trying to maintain his usual confident demeanor, but I could see the cracks forming in his facade. And Celeste? She reached over and grabbed my hand, seeking comfort from the husband she'd been betraying for months, completely unaware that I was the architect of this entire situation. Guys, Dr. Harrison continued, her voice taking on the kind of serious tone that medical professionals use when they're about to deliver news that will change everything. This is hard to say, but your results are serious. We need to contact all your partners immediately. The silence that followed was louder than thunder, more deafening than a rock concert, more complete than the vacuum of space. It was the sound of 5 people realizing that their secret world of betrayal and deception was about to become very, very public. None of them dared look at me. You know how they say revenge is a dish best served cold? Well, I discovered that public humiliation is like a 5-course meal served at absolute zero, and I was about to become the chef of the century. The hospital revelation was just the appetizer. The real feast was about to begin, and every single course was going to be more devastating than the last. See, here's the thing about living in the digital age. Privacy is basically a myth, especially when you're dealing with people whose entire identities are built around their public image. These idiots had spent years crafting their online personas, building their brands, cultivating their reputations like precious little gardens of narcissism, which meant they had a lot further to fall when gravity finally decided to do its job. The beauty of my plan wasn't that I had to destroy them. They'd done most of the heavy lifting themselves with their group chats, their documented affairs, and their complete lack of discretion. All I had to do was give their existing stupidity a little push toward the spotlight, and let human nature handle the rest. Phase 1 started with health blogs. Nothing gets people's attention quite like the suggestion that there might be a possible outbreak brewing, especially when it involves recognizable local figures. I didn't have to lie or exaggerate. I just had to plant the seeds and let people's imaginations run wild with the possibilities. I started with fitchicago.com, a popular local wellness blog that covered everything from new gym openings to nutrition trends. An anonymous tip about concerning health screening results from a recent awareness campaign was all it took to get their attention. Within hours, they'd published a carefully worded article about potential health concerns arising from a local fitness event, complete with enough vague details to make people start connecting dots. The article didn't name names. They were too smart for that, but it included enough specifics about the screening location, the timing, and the prominent local fitness personalities involved that anyone with half a brain could figure out who they were talking about. It was like a puzzle that solved itself, and the internet loves nothing more than a good mystery that makes them feel clever for solving it. From there, the whispers spread through Chicago's interconnected social media ecosystem like wildfire in a dry forest. Fitness influencers started sharing the article with cryptic captions about being careful who you trust and the importance of regular testing. Local gossip accounts picked up the thread, adding their own speculation about which prominent figures might be involved. Dean's gym empire started crumbling first, which made sense considering his entire business model was built around people trusting him with their physical well-being. When you're in the fitness industry, any suggestion of health problems is basically professional suicide. His morning classes went from packed to empty overnight, with members suddenly discovering urgent reasons why they needed to cancel their memberships. The cancellations started trickling in on Saturday, then became a flood by Monday. His premium personal training clients, the ones paying $300 an hour for the privilege of being yelled at by someone with perfect abs, were suddenly too busy to schedule sessions. Corporate wellness contracts that had taken months to negotiate were being reviewed by legal departments who'd gotten nervous about liability issues. By Wednesday, CrossFit Revolution looked like a ghost town with expensive equipment. Dean was hemorrhaging money faster than a hedge fund during a market crash, watching his carefully built fitness empire dissolve because people were suddenly very concerned about what they might catch at his gym. Tyler's crypto empire faced a different kind of collapse, but it was equally spectacular. In the trading world, confidence is everything, and confidence is exactly what Tyler lost when his clients started questioning whether they wanted their financial advisor to be someone who might be dealing with mysterious health issues. Because if you can't manage your own physical well-being, how can you be trusted to manage other people's money? His live streaming audience started dropping off as rumors circulated about his erratic behavior and concerning health problems. Crypto Twitter, which had once hung on his every market prediction, suddenly found his analysis less compelling when it was coming from someone who might be facing serious medical issues. Investment clients began pulling their funds, citing concerns about advisor stability and risk management protocols. The beautiful irony was that Tyler's own obsession with documenting his life on social media had provided all the evidence people needed to fuel the speculation. Screenshots of his panicked livestream meltdown were circulating with captions like, "This you, bro?" and "Maybe stick to trading medical stocks instead." Malik's real estate empire faced the most brutal collapse because his entire business was built on personal relationships and trust. In real estate, your reputation is your currency, and Malik's reputation was getting shredded faster than documents at Enron headquarters. Property developers who'd once competed for his attention were suddenly taking his calls less frequently. Potential buyers started choosing different agents, citing concerns about recent developments and wanting to work with someone more stable. The seven-figure deal he'd walked away from? Word had gotten out about that, and in the real estate world, walking away from major deals without explanation is the kind of behavior that makes people question your judgment, your finances, and your overall stability. Other agents started circulating stories about Malik's unprofessional behavior and questionable decision-making. His carefully cultivated image as the smooth-talking, always successful property mogul was being replaced by whispers about health problems, poor judgment, and possible financial difficulties. In an industry where perception is reality, Malik was watching his entire career circle the drain in real time. But Victor faced the most spectacular destruction because he had the furthest to fall. Apex Fitness wasn't just his company. It was a publicly traded corporation with shareholders, board members, and investors who got very nervous when their CEO became the subject of health-related speculation. The stock price started dropping on Tuesday when the first health blog articles appeared. By Thursday, financial news outlets were reporting on uncertainty surrounding Apex Fitness leadership and investor concerns about executive health disclosures. The company's social media accounts, which had once featured Victor prominently in their marketing, suddenly seemed to be scrubbing his image from their content. Board members were asking uncomfortable questions about whether Victor had disclosed any health issues that might affect his ability to lead the company. Investors were wondering if they should be concerned about the long-term stability of their investment. Corporate partners were reviewing their relationships with Apex Fitness, using the kind of corporate speak that translates to, "We're looking for reasons to distance ourselves from this potential disaster." And then there was Ashley North, Celeste's biggest rival in the influencer world, who smelled blood in the water and moved in for the kill with the precision of a social media shark. Ashley had been waiting for years for an opportunity to take down her competition, and the health screening scandal was like Christmas morning wrapped in a birthday present and delivered by unicorns. Her expose video, titled "Fake Influencer, Fake Authenticity: The Truth About Celeste Harland," was a masterpiece of social media destruction. 23 minutes of carefully researched content that connected all the dots between the health screening, the mysterious illness, and what Ashley had somehow discovered about Celeste's relationship with multiple prominent local figures. The video went viral faster than a pandemic, racking up hundreds of thousands of views in the first 24 hours. Comments sections exploded with speculation, screenshots, and the kind of gleeful destruction that only the internet can provide. Brands that had once competed for Celeste's endorsement were suddenly sending termination emails, citing brand safety concerns and alignment with company values. Her follower count plummeted as people unfollowed in droves, many leaving comments about being disgusted and betrayed by someone they'd trusted for lifestyle advice. Sponsored posts were being deleted, collaboration offers were being rescinded, and her carefully built influencer empire was collapsing faster than a house of cards in a hurricane. The best part? I didn't have to do anything except watch. They'd created the perfect storm for their own destruction, and all I'd done was give it a gentle push in the right direction. There's a special kind of satisfaction that comes from watching someone try to screw you over, only to discover they've actually screwed themselves. It's like watching a magician attempt a disappearing act and accidentally making their own career vanish instead. And when Celeste walked into that divorce attorney's office thinking she was about to pull the con of the century, she had no idea she was actually stepping into a trap I'd been building for years. The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday morning in late May, delivered by some kid who probably made minimum wage plus mileage to ruin people's days professionally. Celeste had been staying at her sister's place since the whole health screening scandal exploded, probably plotting what she thought would be her brilliant escape strategy. The papers were thick, official-looking, and absolutely dripping with the kind of legal arrogance that comes from lawyers who charge by the syllable. Her attorney was Marcus Webb, one of those sharks who advertises on late-night TV with commercials that basically say, "Going through a divorce? Let us help you destroy your spouse's life while we get rich." Webb had a reputation for being ruthless, expensive, and exactly the kind of guy you'd hire if you wanted to squeeze every possible penny out of a marriage before setting it on fire. The petition was a work of fiction that would have made Stephen King jealous. According to Celeste's version of our marriage, I was an emotionally distant husband who had failed to provide adequate financial support, while she contributed significantly to the household through her successful business ventures. Her successful business ventures. Right. Because posting thirst traps on Instagram while sleeping with half of Chicago's male population is apparently the modern equivalent of building a Fortune 500 company. But here's where it gets really entertaining. Celeste and her lawyer had done their homework, or at least they thought they had. They knew I worked for the city sanitation department, they knew my official salary, and they'd probably calculated exactly how much alimony they could squeeze out of me based on those numbers. What they didn't know was that their research was about as thorough as a middle school book report written 5 minutes before class. See, the beautiful thing about building wealth quietly is that when people think they know everything about your finances, they usually know absolutely nothing. Celeste had spent 6 years married to me without ever bothering to dig deeper than my paycheck stubs and W-2 forms. She had no idea about the crypto portfolio that had grown from a few $1,000s into something that would make most divorce attorneys weep tears of pure joy. But here's the kicker, and this is where years of strategic planning finally paid off. Every single one of those crypto investments predated our marriage. Every Bitcoin purchase, every Ethereum transaction, every altcoin gamble I'd made was documented with timestamps that showed I'd acquired them months or even years before Celeste. And I said, I do. In divorce law, there's this beautiful concept called separate property, assets that belong to one spouse individually rather than being part of the marital estate. And thanks to my obsessive record-keeping and conservative approach to financial planning, my crypto fortune was about as separate as property could get. The first hint that Celeste's grand plan might have some flaws came when I showed up to the initial divorce proceedings with Eva Darnell as my attorney. Eva wasn't just any lawyer. She was the lawyer, the kind of legal predator who made other divorce attorneys wake up in cold sweats. She'd built her reputation by dismantling the cases of overconfident spouses who thought they could outsmart the system. Eva was a woman who looked like she could have been a librarian, complete with sensible shoes and reading glasses, but fought like a cage fighter who'd been raised by wolves and trained by Navy SEALs. She had this way of speaking very quietly that made everyone in the room lean forward to hear her. And then she'd deliver legal haymakers that left opposing counsel wondering what the hell had just happened. When Eva walked into that conference room carrying 3 bankers' boxes full of documentation, I could see Webb's confidence start to crack like cheap paint in the sun. Celeste was sitting next to him looking smug and satisfied, probably imagining all the ways she was going to spend my money once the divorce was finalized. Before we begin, Eva said in that deceptively soft voice of hers, I think there are some financial disclosures that might affect the proceedings. She opened the first box and started laying out documents like she was dealing cards in the world's most expensive poker game. Cryptocurrency exchange records, blockchain transaction histories, wallet addresses, tax documentation going back 8 years, a complete financial archaeology of my digital investments. Webb's face went through about 6 different expressions in the span of 30 seconds, starting with confusion and ending somewhere around, "Oh shit, we fucked up big time." Celeste just looked confused, probably wondering why anyone would need that much paperwork to discuss a garbage man's finances. "As you can see," Eva continued, still using that librarian voice that somehow made everything sound more ominous, "Mr. Harland has been quite successful with his cryptocurrency investments. Investments that, as the timestamps clearly show, were initiated and maintained entirely prior to the marriage." The number Eva wrote on the whiteboard for $2 million hit that conference room like a financial asteroid. Webb actually choked on his coffee, which would have been funny if I weren't too busy enjoying the look of absolute shock on Celeste's face. For the first time in our entire relationship, my wife was completely speechless. Her mouth was hanging open like she was trying to catch flies, and her eyes had gone wide enough to use as satellite dishes. The woman who'd spent months calling me impotent and mocking me as the furniture husband was suddenly realizing that the furniture was worth more than everything she'd ever owned combined. "This has to be a mistake," Webb stammered, rifling through his own paperwork like he might find some magic document that would make my crypto fortune disappear. "Our investigation showed that Mr. Harland works in sanitation and earns approximately $55,000 annually." "Mr. Harland does indeed work in sanitation," Eva replied, pulling out more documentation. "He also happens to be a rather astute investor who had the foresight to diversify his portfolio into digital assets before they became mainstream. Assets that, as separate property, will not be subject to division in these proceedings." The rest of the meeting was like watching someone try to fight their way out of quicksand. Webb kept grasping for legal strategies that might give Celeste some claim to my crypto wealth, while Eva systematically destroyed each argument with the precision of a surgeon removing cancerous tissue. Community property? Nope, all acquired before marriage. Marital contributions to growth? Nice try. All gains were from market appreciation and my individual trading decisions. Commingling of assets? Not even close. I'd kept everything completely separate. But Eva wasn't done. The second box contained documentation of Celeste's own financial situation, and it painted a picture that was about as pretty as a dumpster fire in a sewage treatment plant. Credit card debt, unpaid business expenses, tax liabilities from her influencer income. Turns out my successful businesswoman wife was actually drowning in debt she'd been hiding from me. Additionally, Eva said, pulling out the final stack of papers, "There's the matter of Ms. Harland's recent loss of income due to her terminated brand partnerships and canceled sponsorship agreements. Given her current financial obligations and lack of steady employment, she may actually owe Mr. Harland spousal support rather than the other way around." The silence in that room was so complete you could have heard a pin drop in another zip code. Celeste looked like she'd been hit by a truck carrying bad news and driven by karma itself. Webb was staring at his paperwork like it might spontaneously combust and save him from this professional embarrassment. When we finally walked out of that conference room, Celeste's grand plan had been reduced to ash, and her lawyer looked like he wanted to find a new career in something less stressful, like bomb disposal or lion taming. The final divorce decree was signed 6 weeks later. Celeste walked away with exactly what she'd brought into the marriage, which, as it turned out, was a whole lot of debt and a rapidly declining social media presence. Justice, as it turned out, had a sense of humor after all. You know that feeling when you finally take off shoes that have been pinching your feet all day? That moment when the pressure releases and you realize you'd forgotten what comfort actually felt like? That's exactly what freedom tasted like 6 months after the divorce was finalized, sitting in my new downtown loft, watching the Chicago skyline light up like a circuit board against the October evening sky. The apartment was everything my old life wasn't. Clean lines, modern furniture, and absolutely zero traces of the man I used to be. No more hiding in plain sight. No more pretending to be less than I was. No more swallowing my pride, while people I trusted stuck knives in my back. The place screamed success in a way that was subtle but unmistakable, like a Rolex that doesn't need to show off because everyone already knows what it is. My phone had been buzzing nonstop for weeks with messages from Celeste. The notifications had become like background noise, a constant reminder of how completely the tables had turned. Each message was more desperate than the last, evolving from angry demands to pathetic pleas like some kind of reverse character development arc. Michael, we need to talk. This is ridiculous. You can't just ignore me forever. We were married for 6 years. I know I made mistakes, but this is crazy. Call me back. Please. I'm sorry. I need you. Michael, please. I'm really struggling here. I just need someone to talk to. I don't know what to do. Everything's falling apart. Please just call me. Each message got a one-way ticket to digital hell, deleted faster than a crypto scam coin disappearing from someone's wallet. There's something deeply satisfying about having the power to make someone's desperate attempts at communication simply vanish into the void. For years, I'd been the one reaching out, trying to connect, attempting to save a marriage that was already dead in the water. Now the roles were reversed, and I was discovering that ignoring someone can be its own form of poetry. The beautiful thing about karma is that it doesn't need your help once it gets rolling. Dean's gym had closed permanently in September, unable to recover from the mass exodus of members and the mountain of debt he'd accumulated trying to keep the doors open. Last I heard, he was working at a chain fitness center in the suburbs, probably making about as much per hour as a decent barista. From bro, I'm building an empire, to, would you like to upgrade your membership to include towel service? In less than 6 months. Tyler's crypto empire had imploded so spectacularly that it became a cautionary tale in trading circles. His YouTube channel, which once had hundreds of thousands of subscribers hanging on his every market prediction, was now a digital ghost town with comments disabled and upload schedules that had become more irregular than Chicago weather. Word through the grapevine was that he'd moved back in with his parents, probably explaining to his mother why her basement was suddenly full of expensive computer equipment and crushed dreams. Malik's real estate career had cratered harder than the housing market in 2008. The man who used to flip properties like pancakes was now working for someone else's agency, probably showing studio apartments to college kids and pretending he wasn't dying inside every time he had to explain why the kitchen was also the bedroom and the bathroom. His Tesla had been repossessed, his designer wardrobe had probably been sold on eBay, and his Instagram account had gone from lifestyle inspiration to cautionary tale. Victor's fall had been the most spectacular, partly because he'd had the furthest to drop and partly because corporate destruction always happens in slow motion, giving you time to really savor each devastating detail. Apex Fitness stock had tanked so hard that the company became a business school case study in how CEO scandals can destroy shareholder value. The board had forced him out in a move they described as pursuing new leadership direction, which in corporate speak translates to, we're throwing this guy under the bus and backing up to make sure we got him. Last I'd heard, Victor was driving for one of those luxury rideshare services, probably listening to passengers complain about their jobs while remembering when he used to have people complaining about their jobs to him. There's probably some Greek tragedy-level irony in a former CEO chaffering around the kind of executives he used to network with at country club events. But the most interesting twist in this whole saga came from the last person I'd expected, Ashley North. The influencer who delivered the killing blow to Celeste's career had apparently taken notice of the quiet man in the background who'd somehow emerged from the wreckage not just unscathed, but significantly more interesting than anyone had realized. The dinner invitation had arrived via DM 3 weeks ago, casual, but clearly intentional. Hey Michael, I know this might seem random, but I'd love to take you to dinner sometime. I think we might have more in common than people realize. Ashley North wanting to have dinner with me was like discovering that the popular girl from high school had suddenly developed an interest in the quiet kid who used to fix computers in the library. The irony was delicious. The woman who'd helped destroy my wife's career was now apparently interested in getting to know the husband Celeste had thrown away like yesterday's garbage. Our first dinner had been at some upscale place downtown, the kind of restaurant where the menu doesn't have prices and the waiters speak in hushed tones like they're discussing state secrets. Ashley had shown up looking like she'd stepped off a magazine cover, but the conversation had been surprisingly real, surprisingly deep, surprisingly free of the superficial bullshit that I'd grown to expect from people in her world. You know, she'd said over dessert, I spent months researching Celeste's life for that expose, and the more I learned about you, the more I wondered how someone that smart had stayed invisible for so long. Smart. Not impotent, not weak, not furniture. Smart. It was like hearing a foreign language that I'd forgotten I could speak. We'd had 3 more dinners since then, each one feeling less like 2 people getting to know each other and more like 2 people recognizing something they'd been missing without realizing it. Ashley was sharp, funny, and refreshingly honest about the fact that her interest in me had started as curiosity about the mystery man behind the scandal and evolved into something that felt a lot more real than anything I'd experienced in years. Tonight was dinner number 5, at a place Ashley had picked specifically because it was somewhere we can actually talk without people trying to eavesdrop for gossip content. The woman understood the value of privacy, which was something I'd learned to appreciate in ways I never thought I would. As I got ready to leave the apartment, I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror and had to do a double take. The man looking back at me wasn't the invisible husband, the quiet janitor, or the guy people called impotent behind his back. It was someone who looked confident, successful, and completely comfortable in his own skin. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. It had been building for months, layer by layer, like sediment forming rock under pressure. Each deleted message from Celeste, each news update about my former friends' continued downward spirals, each conversation with Ashley that felt like connecting with an actual human being instead of performing for an audience. All of it had contributed to this version of myself that I was still getting used to. Walking out of that apartment, heading to dinner with a woman who was interested in the real me rather than some fantasy version she'd constructed, I realized that revenge hadn't been about destruction at all. It had been about truth. About forcing people to face the consequences of their choices. About refusing to be invisible anymore. About finally becoming the person I'd always been underneath all the loyalty and patience and quiet endurance. They destroyed themselves. I'd just handed them the mirror to see what they'd become. And for the first time in years, I was looking forward to what came next. My wife went on a girls' trip with her rich friends and came back pregnant by her best friend's husband, but her face froze when you know that feeling when your wife bounces into the room with that particular sparkle in her eyes. The one that usually means she's about to spend money we don't have on something we don't need? Yeah, well, that Tuesday evening in March, Marissa practically floated through our front door like she'd just won the lottery. I was sprawled on the couch, remote in hand, trying to decide between watching grown men chase a ball around or some reality show where people pretend to find love in 30 days. Real tough choice there. Honey, she squealed, and I swear the windows rattled. You're never going to believe what just happened. I muted the TV and braced myself. Last time she'd said those exact words, we'd ended up with a timeshare in Florida that we visited exactly once. The time before that, she'd signed us up for ballroom dancing lessons that made me look like a seizure victim having a particularly bad episode. Clara just called. She continued, practically vibrating with excitement as she kicked off those ridiculously expensive heels that cost more than my car payment. She's invited me on the most amazing girls' trip ever. Clara. Of course it was Clara. Clara Martinez Blackwell, or whatever hyphenated name she was using these days, was Marissa's best friend from college and the kind of woman who probably had her morning coffee served on actual gold plates. The woman lived in a different stratosphere than us regular folks, the kind where money wasn't a problem, it was just a tool you used to solve minor inconveniences. Let me guess, I said, already knowing this was going to hurt my wallet somehow. She wants you to fly to Paris for lunch and shop for shoes that cost more than our mortgage? Marissa rolled her eyes in that way that meant I was being dramatic again. No, smartass. She's rented this incredible beach resort for a whole week. Just the girls, no husbands, no kids, no responsibilities. Pure relaxation. She plopped down next to me on the couch, her face glowing like she'd discovered fire. It's going to be champagne every morning, spa treatments every afternoon, and just us girls catching up on everything. When's the last time I got to do something like this? I had to admit, she had a point. Between my job at the insurance company and her work at the nonprofit, we barely had time to catch our breath, let alone take vacations to fancy beach resorts. Our idea of a romantic getaway was usually dinner at Olive Garden followed by a movie we'd stream at home, because we were too cheap to pay theater prices. How much is this going to cost us? I asked, because let's be real. When your wife's rich friends invite her somewhere, there's always a catch, and that catch usually involves your credit card crying itself to sleep. That's the best part, she said, grabbing my hands like she was about to deliver news that would change our lives forever. Clara's covering everything. The resort, the food, the drinks, even the spa treatments. She said she just booked the whole place and wants her closest friends there to celebrate. Celebrate what? Marissa shrugged. I don't know, life? Being awesome? Does it matter? I had to laugh. Only Clara would spend what was probably my annual salary on a week-long party just because she felt like it. Her husband Victor made some kind of ridiculous money in tech or finance or whatever it is that rich guys do when they wear suits that cost more than my car. I'd met him a few times at dinner parties and charity events that Marissa dragged me to, and he seemed decent enough. The kind of guy who remembered your name and actually listened when you talked, which was more than I could say for most of the stuffed shirts in their circle. So when is this magical mystery tour happening? I asked. Next week, she said, and I could practically see her mentally packing already. Clara said it was last minute because someone else canceled, and she didn't want the reservation to go to waste. Of course it was next week. Rich people operated on a different timeline than the rest of us. They could just drop everything and jet off to paradise whenever the mood struck. Meanwhile, I'd have to sweet-talk my boss into letting me take a sick day if I wanted to sleep in on a Tuesday. The next few days were a whirlwind of shopping and preparation that would have made a military operation look casual. Marissa bought new dresses, new swimsuits, new everything. She got her hair done, her nails done, and probably a few other things done that I didn't want to think about too hard. By the time she was ready to leave, our bedroom looked like a boutique had exploded in it. Are you sure you have enough stuff? I asked, watching her try to cram what looked like half of Nordstrom into 2 suitcases. Very funny, she said, but she was smiling. She looked happier than I'd seen her in months, and honestly, that made the credit card damage almost worth it. Almost. The morning she left, she was practically bouncing off the walls with excitement. She'd been up since 5, double-checking everything and making sure she hadn't forgotten anything important. I made her coffee and toast, which she barely touched because she was too excited to eat. You're going to have an amazing time, I told her, and I meant it. She deserved this. We both worked hard, and if her rich friend wanted to spoil her for a week, who was I to complain? She threw her arms around me and kissed me like we were in some romantic movie. I'm going to miss you so much, she said. But I promise I'll call every night and tell you all about it. Just promise me you won't come back with any crazy ideas about redecorating the house with seashells or something, I said. She laughed and kissed me again. No promises. The Uber arrived right on schedule, because of course Clara had arranged for premium transportation to the airport. I helped load her bags, which took longer than it should have because she'd packed like she was planning to relocate permanently to this beach resort. Have fun, I told her as she climbed into the car. Don't do anything I wouldn't do. That doesn't leave me with many options, she shot back with a grin. I watched the car disappear down our street, taking my wife off to paradise with her rich friends. The house felt empty without her energy filling it up, but I was genuinely happy for her. She deserved a week of being pampered and treated like royalty, even if it was at some resort I couldn't even pronounce the name of. I had no idea that I was watching my marriage drive away in that Uber. Had no clue that the woman who'd kissed me goodbye with such excitement would come back, carrying secrets that would destroy everything we'd built together. All I knew was that my wife was going to have the time of her life, and I was going to spend the week eating cereal for dinner and watching sports without anyone judging my life choices. If I'd known what was really going to happen on that once-in-a-lifetime girls' trip, I would have chained her to the couch. But hindsight's 20/20, and at the time, all I could see was my wife's happiness as she headed off to what I thought would be a harmless week of girl talk and overpriced cocktails. Boy, was I wrong. So there I was, living the bachelor life for a whole 12 hours, and let me tell you, it was everything I'd forgotten it could be. I ate pizza straight from the box while standing in my underwear at the kitchen counter, left my socks wherever they landed, and watched 3 consecutive hours of a show about guys building motorcycles. Pure bliss, right? Wrong. Because around 9 o'clock that first night, I started missing her laugh echoing through the house. That's when my phone buzzed with a FaceTime call, and there she was, my gorgeous wife looking like she'd stepped out of some tropical magazine spread. The screen was filled with her sun-kissed face, and behind her, I could see what looked like paradise. Crystal blue water stretched out to the horizon, palm trees swayed in the breeze, and the whole scene was bathed in that golden hour lighting that photographers would probably kill for. "Oh my God, honey, you should see this place," she gushed, holding the phone at arm's length so I could get the full panoramic view. "It's absolutely incredible." And it really was. The resort looked like something out of a billionaire's fever dream. All white marble and infinity pools, with staff members who probably made more in tips than I made in overtime. Clara really hadn't been kidding when she'd said she was going all out for this trip. "Looks like you're suffering real hard out there," I said, settling back into my recliner with a beer. "I can see how this is just terrible for you." She giggled, and I could hear other women's voices in the background. Her fellow escapees from reality, no doubt sharing war stories about their various first-world problems over drinks that cost more than my lunch budget for a week. "We just finished the most amazing dinner," she continued, turning the camera to show me the remnants of what looked like a feast fit for royalty. "And now we're about to hit the beach bar. Clara says they make these signature cocktails that are supposed to be life-changing." Life-changing cocktails, huh? Let me guess. They cost about $50 each and come with a little umbrella that's probably worth more than my tie. "You're so cynical," she laughed, but she didn't deny it. "Just because you can't appreciate the finer things in life doesn't mean the rest of us can't enjoy them." She had me there. While she was sipping champagne that probably aged longer than our marriage, I was working my way through a six-pack of beer I'd bought with a coupon. Different worlds, for sure. The next night, she called again, right on schedule. This time she looked even more radiant, if that was possible. Her skin had that perfect golden glow that only comes from a day spent lounging by the pool without a care in the world. And her hair had those beachy waves that women pay hairstylists hundreds of dollars to recreate. "How was your day in paradise?" I asked, genuinely curious about what rich people did when they had unlimited time and money to burn. "Oh, you know," she said, waving a hand dismissively. "Just girl stuff. We got massages, laid by the pool, had lunch at this cute little place overlooking the water." "Sounds rough," I said. Meanwhile, I had to deal with Mrs. Patterson calling about her flood claim for the third time this week. Apparently, her definition of water damage includes everything that's ever been in the same room as a glass of water. She laughed, but it seemed a little forced. "Poor baby. Are you surviving without me?" "Barely," I said. "I actually had to do my own laundry yesterday. Nearly called emergency services." As we talked, I noticed other women moving around in the background, Clara and her crew, all looking like they belonged in a luxury resort commercial. They were the kind of women who never had bad hair days or worried about whether their jeans made their butts look big, because they could afford personal trainers and stylists to handle those problems for them. "What else did you guys do today?" I asked, because honestly, I was curious about how the other half lived. "Oh, just, typical vacation stuff," she said, but her answer felt weirdly vague. Usually Marissa would give me a play-by-play of her day, complete with detailed descriptions of every meal and commentary on everyone's outfits. This time, it was like she was reading from a script written by someone who'd never been on vacation before. "Come on," I pressed, "give me details. What's Clara like when she's not hosting charity dinners? Are the other women as pretentious as they seem at those fancy parties you drag me to?" "They're actually really sweet," she said, but she seemed distracted by something happening off-screen. "Look, honey, I should probably go. The girls are waiting for me, and we're about to head out for the evening. Hot date with a Mai Tai?" I joked. "Something like that," she said, and for just a split second, I thought I saw someone move behind her, a male figure that definitely wasn't one of the girls. But it happened so fast that I convinced myself I'd imagined it. Maybe it was just a waiter or one of those resort staff members who were probably trained to be invisible until you needed them. The third night, the pattern continued. Beautiful scenery, glowing wife, vague answers about her day. But this time, I was sure I saw him, a guy in the background, just a glimpse, but enough to make me pause. "Hey, was that Victor the first just saw?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "Victor?" She looked confused for a split second, then recovered. "Oh, yeah. He stopped by earlier to check on things. You know how Clara is. She likes to make sure everything's perfect." That made sense, I guess. Rich guy's rich wife throws expensive party. Rich guy makes sure rich wife has everything she needs. It was probably standard operating procedure in their tax bracket. Still, Something about the way she'd hesitated before answering nagged at me. Is he staying at the resort too? I asked. God, no. She laughed, and this time it sounded more natural. Can you imagine? This is supposed to be girls' time. He's probably back home, playing golf and doing whatever it is that guys like Victor do when their wives are away. That made me feel better, though I couldn't quite put my finger on why I'd been bothered in the first place. Maybe it was just the weird adjustment of being apart for longer than we'd ever been since we got married. Or maybe it was the fact that her world and mine felt more different than ever when she was surrounded by all that luxury. I miss you, I told her, and I meant it. I miss you too, she said, but she was already looking away, distracted by something or someone calling her name. Look, I really do have to go. The girls are getting impatient, and you know how Clara gets when people keep her waiting. Actually, I didn't know how Clara got about anything, because we moved in completely different social circles. But I nodded anyway. Go have fun, I said. Just remember, what happens in paradise better stay in paradise, or I'm trading you in for a younger model. She laughed, but something about it didn't quite reach her eyes. Very funny. Love you. Love you too. The screen went black, leaving me alone with my beer and the nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right. But what did I know about girls' trips to expensive resorts? Maybe this was just how rich people vacationed, all mysterious and glamorous, with vague stories and expensive cocktails. I shook off the weird feeling and went back to my motorcycle show. After all, what could possibly go wrong on a simple girls' trip? Famous last words, right there. You know how when you've been looking forward to something for so long that when it finally happens, it almost feels anticlimactic? That's exactly how I felt sitting in the arrivals area at the airport, holding one of those cheesy welcome home signs I'd made as a joke. I'd even drawn little stick figures of us on it with hearts floating around our heads, because I'm nothing if not a romantic genius. I'd been counting down the days like some lovesick teenager, planning this whole elaborate homecoming. I'd cleaned the house until it sparkled, bought her favorite flowers, and even attempted to cook something that didn't come from a box or require a microwave. The lasagna was probably going to give us both food poisoning. But hey, it's the thought that counts, right? When I finally spotted her coming down the escalator, my heart did that stupid flutter thing that still happened even after all these years of marriage. She looked incredible, tanned, relaxed, wearing this flowy white dress that made her look like some kind of beach goddess. Her hair was lighter from the sun, and she had that effortless vacation glow that made me remember why I'd fallen for her in the first place. There's my world traveler, I called out, holding up the ridiculous sign and probably embarrassing her in front of all the other sophisticated travelers who definitely didn't make arts and crafts projects for airport pickups. But instead of the huge smile and running leap hug I was expecting, she just walked over, like she was reporting for duty or something. She kissed my cheek, not my lips, and said, "Hi, honey," in the same tone someone might use to acknowledge the mailman. That's it, I asked, genuinely confused. I don't get the full rom-com airport reunion scene. I made a sign and everything. She glanced at the sign and managed what I can only describe as a polite smile, the kind you give to your dentist when he tells you that you need to floss more. It's very nice, she said, but she was already looking around for the exit. The drive home was weird. Like, really weird. Usually after any kind of trip, even just a weekend visiting her parents, Marissa would talk my ear off about everything that happened. She'd give me a minute-by-minute breakdown of who said what they ate, who wore the ugliest outfit, the whole 9 yards. I'd learned to just nod and make appropriate noises at the right moments, because honestly, I loved hearing her get excited about stuff. But this time, radio silence. She just stared out the window like she was seeing our neighborhood for the first time, or maybe like she was already missing wherever she'd just been. Her phone was in her lap, and I swear she checked it about every 30 seconds, which was strange because Marissa usually complained about being too connected to technology. So, I said, trying to break the ice, was the resort as amazing as it looked in those pictures you sent? She said, still looking out the window. Very nice. Very nice? That was it. This from the woman who once gave me a 45-minute detailed review of a chain restaurant because they'd brought her the wrong salad dressing? And the girls? How was Clara? Did she live up to her reputation as the ultimate hostess? She was fine, Marissa said, shifting in her seat. They were all fine. I tried a different approach. Come on, give me something here. Did anyone have any drama? Surely someone's Botox went wrong or their fake eyelashes fell into the soup or something. These are your rich friends we're talking about. There had to be at least one meltdown over thread count or champagne temperature. She finally looked at me, and for just a second, I saw something flash across her face. Guilt? Panic? But it was gone so fast I almost thought I'd imagined it. Nothing like that happened, she said. It was just relaxing. You know, spa stuff and pool time. Not really exciting enough for a full recap. Not exciting enough. This was Marissa we were talking about. The woman who once spent an entire evening telling me about a conversation she'd overheard in the grocery store checkout line. Everything was exciting enough for a full recap when it came to my wife. When we got home, I carried her bags in while she kind of wandered around the house like she was taking inventory. I'd spent hours making sure everything was perfect. Flowers on the counter, candles lit in the bedroom, even that fancy bottle of wine we'd been saving for a special occasion chilling in the fridge. Welcome home, beautiful, I said, gesturing around at my handiwork like some demented game show host. I know it's not as fancy as your five-star resort, but it's got something that place didn't have. What's that? She asked, and I could swear she looked almost nervous about my answer. Me, I said, going for charming but probably landing somewhere closer to cheesy. Your devastatingly handsome husband who missed you like crazy and may have burned dinner in your honor. That got a small smile out of her, the first real one since she'd gotten off that plane. You cooked. I attempted to cook, I corrected. Whether it's actually edible remains to be seen. But hey, if we die from food poisoning, at least we'll go together, right? Romantic, she said, but she was already heading toward the stairs. I think I'm going to take a shower first, if that's okay. I feel like I've got airplane germs all over me. Sure, I said, trying not to feel deflated. Take your time. I'll keep dinner warm. She disappeared upstairs, and I heard the bathroom door close, followed by the sound of the lock clicking. Which was weird, because Marissa never locked the bathroom door when it was just us. Hell, half the time she left it open while she was getting ready, chattering away about her day while she did her makeup. I stood there in our kitchen, surrounded by flowers and candles and the lingering smell of my culinary disaster, feeling more alone than I had during the entire week she'd been gone. Something was definitely off, but I couldn't put my finger on what it was. Maybe she was just tired from traveling, or maybe the adjustment from luxury resort life back to our regular existence was harder than expected. When she finally came downstairs, she was wearing her oldest, most comfortable pajamas and had pulled her hair back in a messy bun. She looked more like herself, but there was still something distant about her, like she was physically present but mentally still somewhere else entirely. Dinner smells. She paused, probably searching for a diplomatic way to describe whatever horror I'd created in the kitchen. Interesting. That's one word for it, I said. I was going for edible, but I'll take interesting. We sat down to eat, and I kept waiting for her to open up, to tell me about her week, to act like the woman I'd married instead of this polite stranger who happened to look exactly like my wife. But she just picked at her food and made small talk about the weather and asked about my work week like we were acquaintances catching up at a high school reunion. After dinner, she claimed she was exhausted and went to bed early. I found her curled up on her side of the bed, facing away from me, already pretending to be asleep even though I could tell from her breathing that she wasn't. When I tried to put my arm around her, she tensed up and mumbled something about being tired. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling and trying to figure out what the hell had happened to my wife during her week in paradise. Because the woman lying next to me might have looked like Marissa, might have sounded like Marissa, but she sure as hell wasn't acting like the woman I'd kissed goodbye at the airport a week ago. Something had changed during that trip, and whatever it was, it felt like it was sitting between us in bed like an invisible wall. I just had no idea how thick that wall was about to get. A month. A whole goddamn month of living with a stranger who happened to share my bed and my last name. 31 days of watching my wife go through the motions of being married to me while acting like I was some kind of roommate she barely tolerated. 31 days of increasingly awkward conversations, forced smiles, and this weird tension that hung over our house like a fog that wouldn't lift. I tried everything I could think of to snap her out of whatever funk she was in. I brought home flowers, the expensive ones from the fancy florist, not the grocery store's sad-looking bouquet. I suggested date nights, weekend getaways, even offered to take her to one of those pretentious restaurants she loved, where they served microscopic portions on plates the size of dinner tables. Nothing worked. She went through the motions, said all the right words, but it was like she was reading from a script written by someone who'd never actually been in love. The worst part was the phone thing. Jesus Christ, the phone thing was driving me insane. She'd always been attached to her phone. What woman wasn't these days? But this was different. This was obsessive. She carried it with her everywhere, clutched it like it contained the secrets of the universe, and God forbid I should happen to glance in its direction. She'd angle it away from me, turn the screen toward her body, and sometimes she'd even leave the room just to check her messages. "Who keeps texting you?" I'd asked one evening when her phone had buzzed for the 15th time during dinner. "Just work stuff," she'd said, not even looking up from whatever was apparently more interesting than the conversation we weren't having. Since when does the nonprofit send urgent messages during dinner? Did someone discover a new way to save endangered butterflies that couldn't wait until morning? She'd given me one of those looks, the kind that said I was being unreasonable for expecting my wife to actually talk to me during meals. "It's just busy right now," she'd said, and that was the end of that conversation. But this particular Tuesday morning, something was different. I could feel it the moment I walked into the kitchen. Marissa was sitting at our dining table, the one we'd bought at a garage sale and refinished together during our first year of marriage when we thought projects like that were romantic instead of just exhausting. She had her hands wrapped around a coffee mug like she was trying to absorb its warmth, and she was staring at the table like it held the answers to all of life's mysteries. "Morning, sunshine," I said, going for my usual cheerful husband routine, even though we both knew it was getting harder to pull off. "You're up early. Couldn't sleep?" She looked up at me, and I felt my stomach drop. Her face was pale, her eyes were red-rimmed like she'd been crying, and she had this expression that I'd never seen before, like she was about to deliver news that would change everything. It was the kind of look people got right before they told you someone had died or the house was being foreclosed on. "We need to talk," she said, and her voice was barely above a whisper. For simple words that every husband in the history of marriage has learned to fear. Because "we need to talk" never preceded good news. Nobody ever said, "we need to talk," and then announced they'd won the lottery or gotten a promotion or found a $20 bill in their old jeans. "We need to talk" was relationship code for "buckle up, buttercup, because your world is about to get rearranged." I sat down across from her, trying to read her face for clues about what kind of disaster we were dealing with. My mind started racing through possibilities. Had she lost her job? Were her parents sick? Had someone died? Was she having some kind of midlife crisis where she decided she needed to find herself by backpacking through Europe or taking up pottery? "Okay," I said, trying to sound calm even though my heart was already picking up speed. "What's going on?" She took a shaky breath, and her hands trembled so badly around that coffee mug that I thought she might drop it. "I'm pregnant," she whispered. And for about 3 seconds, my world tilted in the best possible way. Pregnant. We'd been trying for a baby for months, having those careful conversations about timing and finances, and whether we were ready to bring a tiny human into our messy, imperfect life. We'd bought pregnancy tests in bulk from Costco, like we were preparing for some kind of conception apocalypse. We'd tracked ovulation cycles and optimal timing until the whole thing started feeling more like a science experiment than romance. "Are you serious?" I asked, and I could feel this stupid grin spreading across my face. "Really? We're finally going to be parents." But she didn't smile back. She didn't throw herself into my arms or start crying happy tears or do any of the things I'd imagined she'd do when this moment finally came. Instead, she just sat there looking like she was about to throw up, and not in a cute morning sickness kind of way. "Marissa," I said, and something cold started creeping up my spine. "What's wrong? Aren't you happy about this?" She opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again like a fish gasping for air. When she finally spoke, her voice was so quiet I had to lean forward to hear her. "It's not yours." The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually felt my chest constrict, like someone had reached into my ribcage and squeezed my heart with their fist. The kitchen seemed to tilt sideways, and for a moment I wondered if I was having some kind of medical emergency, because surely this couldn't be real. Surely my wife hadn't just told me she was pregnant with another man's baby. "What did you just say?" I asked, because maybe I'd misheard. Maybe she'd said something else, something that didn't destroy everything I thought I knew about my life. She looked down at the table, tears streaming down her face now. The baby, it's not yours. Whose is it? The question came out of my mouth before my brain had fully processed what was happening. I felt like I was watching this conversation from outside my body, like this was happening to someone else, and I was just a spectator to my own life falling apart. She was crying harder now, ugly sobs that shook her whole body. Victor's, she whispered. Clara's husband. And there it was. The bomb that had been ticking away for a month finally exploded, taking our marriage, our future, our entire life together and blowing it into tiny, irreparable pieces. Victor. Clara's husband Victor, who I'd shaken hands with at charity dinners and made small talk with about sports and the weather. Victor, who'd apparently done a lot more than just check on things during that girl's trip to paradise. I sat there, staring at my wife, my pregnant wife who was carrying another man's child, and tried to process information that my brain simply refused to accept. This had to be a mistake, a misunderstanding. Maybe she'd gotten confused about dates or timing or something. Anything other than what she was telling me. How? I asked, because apparently my mouth was still working even though my brain had completely shut down. The trip, she said, still not looking at me. Clara had to leave for a few days. Family emergency. Victor came to help out with arrangements, make sure everything was still perfect. One night we all drank too much, and she trailed off, but she didn't need to finish. I could fill in the blanks. I could picture it all too clearly. My wife, drunk on expensive wine and the fantasy of a life she'd never have, falling into bed with someone who represented everything I wasn't. Someone rich and sophisticated and successful, someone who belonged in her world of luxury resorts and five-star everything. It just happened, she said, like that explanation made any of this okay. It was a mistake. A terrible, stupid mistake, and I hate myself for it. I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the table and punch holes in the walls and demand to know how the hell you accidentally end up pregnant with your best friend's husband's baby. But instead, I just sat there, numb and broken, watching my marriage dissolve into something I didn't recognize. Does Clara know? I asked. She shook her head, fresh tears streaming down her face. No. God, no. It would destroy her. It would destroy their marriage. And what about ours? I asked. What about our marriage, Marissa? She finally looked up at me, her face streaked with mascara and misery. I don't know, she whispered. I don't know how to fix this. The thing was, looking at her sitting there, destroyed by the weight of what she'd done, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Because this was the woman I'd loved for years, the woman I'd planned to grow old with, and seeing her in pain still triggered every protective instinct I had. But then I remembered what she'd done, what she'd thrown away, what she'd chosen over me and our life together. And just like that, the sympathy evaporated, leaving behind something harder and colder than anything I'd ever felt before. You know that moment in movies where the main character gets life-changing news and the camera does this slow zoom while dramatic music swells in the background? Yeah, well, real life doesn't come with a soundtrack, and there's no director yelling cut when things get too intense. There's just you, sitting in your kitchen that still smells like the coffee you made before your world imploded, staring at your wife while she destroys everything you thought you knew about your life. Tell me everything, I said, and my voice sounded weird and flat, like it was coming from someone else entirely. I want to know exactly how this happened. Marissa looked up at me with those red, puffy eyes, and for a split second I saw the woman I'd fallen in love with, vulnerable and scared and desperately hoping I'd somehow make this all okay. But that feeling lasted about as long as a snowball in hell, because then I remembered that she'd been screwing her best friend's husband while I was home eating pizza and missing her like some kind of lovesick idiot. I don't think you really want to hear the details, she said, wiping her nose with a tissue that looked like it had been through several rounds of crying already. Oh, but I do, I said, leaning back in my chair and crossing my arms. See, the thing is, for the past month I've been driving myself crazy trying to figure out what was wrong with you. I thought maybe you were sick or depressed or having some kind of existential crisis about turning 35. I never once thought, hey, maybe my wife is pregnant with another dude's baby. So yeah, I really want to hear how we got from innocent girl's trip to surprise. You're going to be raising someone else's kid. She flinched like I'd slapped her, which honestly felt pretty good in that moment. You don't have to be cruel about it. Cruel? I laughed, and it came out sounding harsh and bitter. Lady, I haven't even gotten started on cruel yet. You want to see cruel? Cruel is spending your anniversary weekend screwing around with your friend's husband while your actual husband is at home planning romantic dinners and buying expensive wine to celebrate your return. It wasn't our anniversary weekend, she said quietly. Oh, excuse me. My mistake. That makes it totally fine then. She took a shaky breath and started talking, and I swear every word was like a knife twisting in my chest. Clara got a call on the third day. Her mother had a heart attack, and she had to fly back to Boston immediately. She was a mess, crying about ruining the trip for everyone. But we all told her to go, obviously. Family comes first. Obviously, I said, because apparently I was going to be sarcastic through this entire conversation. It was either that or start throwing things, and we couldn't afford to replace the dishes. Victor flew in that afternoon to handle the resort arrangements and make sure we had everything we needed. Clara insisted. She didn't want our trip ruined just because she had to leave. How thoughtful of her. And how convenient for you. Marissa's hands were shaking so badly now that she had to put her coffee mug down. He was just being nice. Making sure we had dinner reservations, arranging spa appointments, that kind of thing. He was trying to honor what Clara had planned for us. And somewhere between arranging spa appointments and making dinner reservations, you two decided to honor something else entirely. It wasn't like that, she said, but her voice was getting smaller and smaller, like she was trying to disappear into herself. The first couple of days after Clara left, everything was normal. Victor was polite and helpful, but distant. Professional, you know, like he was just doing a job. But then what? The professionalism just wore off? Did you guys bond over the minibar prices, or what? She shot me a look that was part anger, part pain. Do you want to hear this, or do you just want to make jokes? Oh, I definitely want to hear this. This is better than cable. She was quiet for a long moment, and I could practically see her gathering courage to continue. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. The last night, we all went to this beachside restaurant. The other girls were tired and went back to their rooms early, but Victor and I ended up staying at the bar. We were talking about Clara, about how worried we both were, and somehow we just kept drinking. Those tropical drinks don't taste like they have any alcohol in them, but they do. What a shocking revelation. I know you're angry, she said, but please don't make this harder than it already is. Harder for who? For you? Because from where I'm sitting, you made your choices. Nobody forced you to keep drinking with another woman's husband. You're right, she said, and she sounded so defeated that I almost felt sorry for her again. Almost. I made terrible choices. We both did. We talked about our marriages, about how different our lives were, about how sometimes we both felt like we were pretending to be people we weren't. What the hell is that supposed to mean? I don't know, she said, fresh tears streaming down her face. I was drunk and confused and feeling sorry for myself. He was talking about how hard it was being married to someone who lived in a completely different world than he grew up in, and I was complaining about how I sometimes felt like I was settling for a smaller life than I'd imagined. That one hit like a physical blow. Settling? You felt like you were settling by being married to me. I didn't mean it like that, she said quickly. I was drunk and stupid and saying things I didn't really mean. But in that moment, sitting there with someone who understood what it was like to feel out of place in your own life, it felt like. Like what? Like I wasn't alone. We sat there in silence for a moment, and I could hear the clock on the wall ticking away the seconds of my old life, the life where I thought my wife loved me and we were building something together. So you felt understood and decided to celebrate by having sex with him. It wasn't planned, she said desperately. We walked back to the resort together, and when we got to my room, we were still talking, and he came in for just a minute, and then you accidentally tripped and fell on his dick? God, you're being awful. I'm being awful. I'm not the one who cheated on my spouse while on vacation. I know what I did was wrong, she said, her voice breaking. I know I hurt you, and I know I betrayed Clara, and I know I ruined everything. But it really was just one night. One terrible, stupid night that I regret more than anything I've ever done in my life. One night that resulted in a pregnancy. Yes, one night that you didn't think to mention for an entire month. I didn't know I was pregnant until last week. Looking lost and broken. And when I found out— When you found out what? She trailed. You thought you'd just never tell me and raise the kid as mine. I don't know what I thought, she admitted. I was terrified and ashamed, and I didn't know how to tell you. I kept hoping maybe the test was wrong, or maybe what? Maybe you could just pretend it never happened. Maybe you could forgive me, she whispered. And there it was. The question that had been hanging in the air since she dropped this bomb on me. Could I forgive her? Could we somehow work through this and come out the other side still married, still together, still pretending to be happy? Looking at her sitting there, destroyed by guilt and fear and the weight of what she'd done, I wanted to say yes. Part of me wanted to be the bigger person, the understanding husband who could overcome anything for love. Part of me wanted to take her in my arms and tell her we'd figure it out together. But a bigger part of me, the part that had been planning our future and saving for our kids and believing in our promises to each other, was already dead. She'd killed it on a beach in paradise with a man who could give her everything I couldn't. I don't know, I said finally. I honestly don't know if I can forgive this. And in that moment, looking at her face crumple with the realization that she might have lost me forever, I knew that our marriage was over. Maybe not officially, not yet, but in every way that mattered. She'd chosen him over me, even if it was just for one night. And now we all had to live with the consequences. I didn't sleep that night. Not a single goddamn minute. I lay there in what used to be our bed, staring at the ceiling while Marissa tossed and turned beside me, probably having nightmares about her perfect little world crashing down around her ears. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them together, my wife and Victor, drunk on expensive booze and the thrill of betraying the people who trusted them most. The worst part? I kept trying to convince myself that maybe I could get past this. Maybe we could go to counseling, work through our issues, and somehow rebuild what she'd destroyed. People survived infidelity all the time, right? There were entire industries built around helping couples recover from affairs. Maybe I could be one of those noble, forgiving husbands who rose above his pain for the sake of love. But every time I started down that path, I hit the same wall, the baby. Because this wasn't just about a one-night stand or a moment of weakness. This was about raising another man's child, looking at that kid every day for the rest of my life and being reminded of what my wife had done. This was about family photos where I'd know the truth that nobody else could see, about birthday parties and Christmas mornings and college graduations built on a foundation of lies. Around 5 a.m, I gave up on sleep and went downstairs to make coffee. My hands were shaking as I measured out the grounds, and I kept replaying Marissa's confession in my head like some kind of twisted highlight reel. The way she described feeling understood by Victor, like I was some kind of emotional moron who couldn't comprehend her complex inner life. The way she talked about settling for a smaller life, like our marriage was some consolation prize she'd accepted because she couldn't do better. That's when it hit me. The thing that had been nagging at me since yesterday. Clara didn't know. She was walking around, probably planning dinner parties and charity events, completely oblivious to the fact that her husband had knocked up her best friend during what was supposed to be an innocent girl's trip. She was living in the same fool's paradise I'd been living in a month ago, trusting people who didn't deserve it. I found myself reaching for my phone before I'd fully decided what I was going to do. Clara's number was in my contacts from some dinner party planning committee Marissa had roped me into helping with last year. We'd exchanged maybe a dozen text messages total, mostly about logistics and timing, but I had her number. Did she deserve to know? Hell yes, she did. Did I have the right to tell her? That was a murkier question, but as I sat there in my kitchen at 5:30 in the morning, watching the sun come up on the worst day of my life, I decided that moral ambiguity was a luxury I couldn't afford. Someone needed to tell Clara the truth, and it sure as hell wasn't going to be Marissa, who seemed more concerned about preserving her friendships than taking responsibility for what she'd done. I waited until 8 o'clock, figuring that was a reasonable time to call someone with devastating news. Because apparently I still had some sense of social etiquette, even in the middle of my personal apocalypse. Hello. Clara's voice was bright and cheerful, probably because she thought she was getting a friendly morning call from her best friend's husband. Maybe she thought I was calling to thank her for the amazing trip she'd given Marissa, or to chat about some upcoming social event. Hi, Clara. It's me, Marissa's husband, I said, realizing I sounded like I was introducing myself to someone I'd never met. Which was basically accurate, since all our previous interactions had been surface-level pleasantries at parties where we were both just playing our assigned roles as supportive spouses. "Oh, hi." She sounded genuinely pleased to hear from me. "How are you? How's Marissa?" I've been meaning to call her, but things have been so crazy since I got back from Boston. My mother's doing much better, thank goodness, but the whole experience was just exhausting. And there it was, the perfect opening to destroy her day, her marriage, and probably her entire worldview. "Actually, that's kind of why I'm calling," I said, trying to figure out how to ease into this conversation. "How do you tell someone their husband cheated on them? Was there a protocol for this kind of thing? Is everything okay?" Her voice had changed, picking up on the tension in mine. "You sound serious. Clara, I need to tell you something, and it's going to be really hard to hear, but I think you deserve to know." There was a pause, and I could practically hear her brain switching gears, preparing for bad news. "What is it?" "It's about the trip. About what happened after you had to leave." Another pause, longer this time. "What about it?" I took a deep breath and jumped off the cliff. "Marissa is pregnant. And the baby, it's not mine." The silence that followed was so complete, I thought the call might have dropped. I could hear her breathing, quick and shallow, like she was hyperventilating. "I'm sorry, what did you just say?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "The baby is Victor's," I said, because apparently once you start dropping truth bombs, you might as well make sure they hit their target. "They slept together while you were in Boston dealing with your mother's emergency." "That's not possible," she said, but her voice was shaking now. "Victor was just helping out. He was being supportive. He would never." "Clara, I'm not making this up." Marissa told me everything yesterday. They got drunk on the last night, and one thing led to another. I heard her make a sound that was somewhere between a gasp and a sob. "Are you absolutely sure? Are you sure she's not mistaken, or confused, or—" "She's sure," I said. "And so am I." The sound that came through the phone next was unlike anything I'd ever heard. A wail of pure anguish that made my chest tighten, with sympathy even in the middle of my own pain. This was a woman's world collapsing in real time, and I was the one holding the demolition charges. "Oh God," she whispered. "Oh God, oh God, oh God." "Clara, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry to have to tell you this, but I thought you deserved to know." "How long have you known?" she asked, and her voice was getting stronger now, harder. I could hear the anger starting to build underneath the shock. "Since yesterday. Marissa just told me. And she was never going to tell me, was she? She was just going to let me go on being friends with her, hosting dinner parties for her, treating her like family, while she was carrying my husband's baby." "I don't know what she was planning," I said, though honestly, I had a pretty good idea. Marissa had probably been hoping she could somehow make this whole situation disappear, maybe pass the baby off as mine, and go on living her double life. "Where is she now?" Clara asked. "Upstairs. Still sleeping, I think." "And where's Victor?" "I have no idea. Probably at your house, getting ready for work like nothing happened." I heard something crash in the background, followed by Clara shouting Victor's name in a voice that could have shattered glass. Then the line went dead. I sat there staring at my phone, knowing I'd just set off a chain reaction that was going to destroy at least 2 marriages and probably ruin several friendships. But for the first time since Marissa had dropped her bomb on me yesterday, I felt something that might have been satisfaction. Because Clara deserved to know the truth, just like I had. And Victor deserved to face the consequences of what he'd done, just like Marissa was about to. Within 10 minutes, my phone started buzzing with text messages. First from a number I didn't recognize, probably Victor, trying to do damage control. Then from Marissa's phone upstairs, which meant Clara had already called her and probably said some things that weren't going to help anyone's day get better. I deleted Victor's messages without reading them and ignored Marissa's frantic texting. Whatever they wanted to say, whatever explanations or justifications or desperate pleas for forgiveness they had prepared, I wasn't interested. I'd done what needed to be done, and now everyone involved could deal with the fallout. Because here's the thing about secrets, they're like cancer. They might stay hidden for a while, growing quietly in the dark, but eventually they always come to light. And when they do, they destroy everything they touch. I'd just chosen to be the surgeon instead of waiting for the disease to kill us all slowly. The sound of Marissa's feet hitting the floor upstairs told me my peaceful morning was about to end. In a few minutes, she'd come downstairs and demand to know why I'd betrayed her by telling Clara the truth. She'd probably cry and scream and accuse me of being vindictive and cruel. And you know what? She'd be right. I was being vindictive and cruel. But after what she'd done to me, to us, to the future we'd planned together, I figured I'd earned the right to a little vindictiveness. Sometimes the truth is the cruelest weapon of all. And sometimes, that's exactly what people deserve. The sound of Marissa's feet pounding down the stairs was like a countdown to an explosion. I could tell from the rhythm, quick, panicked, desperate, that she'd gotten Clara's call and was about to unleash hell in our kitchen. I took another sip of my coffee and braced myself for what was coming. Because after yesterday's confession and this morning's phone call, I was pretty sure we were about to have the kind of fight that ended marriages. She appeared in the doorway like some kind of avenging angel, except instead of bringing divine justice, she was bringing accusation and fury. Her hair was a mess. She was still wearing the oversized t-shirt she'd slept in, and her face was flushed with the kind of anger that made people do stupid things like throw dishes or key cars. "What did you do?" she demanded, and her voice was pitched so high it probably disturbed dogs in neighboring counties. I looked up from my coffee with what I hoped was an expression of complete innocence. "Good morning to you too, sweetheart. Sleep well." "Don't you dare," she said, pointing at me like I was a misbehaving dog. "Don't you dare act like you don't know what I'm talking about. Clara just called me, absolutely hysterical, saying you told her about." She trailed off, probably realizing that saying "about my affair" out loud made it sound even worse than it already was. "About your pregnancy?" I suggested helpfully. "About the fact that you're carrying her husband's baby? About the little detail you conveniently forgot to mention to your best friend while you were crying on my shoulder about how guilty you felt?" Her mouth opened and closed a few times, like she was a fish trying to breathe air. For a moment, she just stood there in our kitchen doorway, frozen in this expression of complete disbelief. It was like her brain couldn't process the fact that I'd actually done what any rational person would do in this situation, told the truth to someone who deserved to hear it. "How could you do that?" she finally managed to say, and her voice was barely above a whisper. "How could you call her and destroy her life like that?" I almost laughed. Actually, I did laugh, a short, bitter sound that probably wasn't helping the situation but felt really good in the moment. "I destroyed her life? That's rich, Marissa. Really rich. Because last time I checked, I wasn't the one who had an affair with her husband." "That's not the point," she said, and now she was getting that shrill quality in her voice that meant she was working herself up to a full-scale meltdown. "You had no right to tell her. That wasn't your secret to share." "You're absolutely right," I said, standing up and setting my coffee mug down with deliberate care. "It was your secret to share. Your responsibility to tell your best friend that you'd been screwing her husband behind her back. But since you seemed perfectly content to let her go on living in ignorance while you figured out how to spin this whole situation to your advantage, I figured someone needed to step up and do the right thing." "The right thing?" She was full-on shrieking now, her face turning red with indignation. "The right thing would have been letting me handle this my own way, in my own time." "Your own way?" I repeated. "You mean the way where Clara never finds out, and you somehow convince me to raise Victor's kid as my own, while you all continue playing happy families at dinner parties and charity events?" "I never said that. You didn't have to say it. It was written all over your face every time I asked what your plan was. You were hoping this would all just magically work itself out, weren't you? Maybe you thought I'd be so grateful to finally be a dad that I wouldn't care whose DNA the kid actually had." She was crying now, ugly sobs that shook her whole body, but I felt absolutely no sympathy for her. Zero. Because this was exactly the kind of crocodile tears routine she'd been pulling for the past month, acting like she was the victim in this situation instead of the person who'd caused it. "You don't understand," she said between sobs. "Clara and I have been friends since college. She's like a sister to me. This is going to destroy our friendship." "Good," I said, and I meant it. "Your friendship should be destroyed. You want to know why? Because friends don't sleep with each other's husbands. Friends don't keep life-altering secrets from each other. And friends definitely don't throw each other under the bus when the truth finally comes out." "I wasn't throwing anyone under the bus." "No? Then what were you doing?" "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you were perfectly happy to let Clara go on trusting her husband and believing in her marriage while you sat on the biggest bombshell in the history of your friendship." My phone buzzed with another text message, probably from Victor trying to explain himself or apologize or whatever it is that cheating husbands do when their worlds collapse. I ignored it, just like I'd been ignoring all his calls and messages since Clara had undoubtedly confronted him about an hour ago. "He's been trying to call you," Marissa said, noticing my phone. "Victor," Clara threw him out. "He's been calling and texting, begging you to talk to him." "And why exactly would I want to talk to the man who knocked up my wife?" "Because he's sorry. Because this whole thing was a mistake that got out of hand. Because he never meant for any of this to happen." I stared at her for a long moment, genuinely amazed by her capacity for self-delusion. "Do you hear yourself right now? You're actually defending him. You're standing in our kitchen, pregnant with another man's baby, and you're asking me to feel sorry for him because his wife kicked him out." "I'm not defending him. I'm just saying that this situation is complicated, and calling Clara without talking to me first was what? Was honest? Was fair? Was exactly what any decent human being would do in this situation." She wiped her nose with the back of her hand, and for a moment, she looked like a little kid who'd been caught doing something she knew was wrong. "It was cruel," she said finally. "Cruel." I let the word hang in the air between us for a moment. "You want to know what cruel is, Marissa? Cruel is your husband finding out he's going to be a father and being happy about it for exactly 3 seconds before you tell him the baby isn't his. Cruel is lying to your best friend's face for a month while you figure out how to manage the fallout from your affair. Cruel is asking the man whose life you just destroyed to keep your secrets and protect your reputation. I never asked you to do any of that. You didn't have to ask. You just assumed I would, because that's what good little husbands do, right? They clean up their wives' messes and pretend everything is fine for the sake of appearances." The kitchen fell silent except for the sound of her crying and the distant hum of traffic outside. We stood there staring at each other across the space that used to be our shared life, and I could see the exact moment when she realized that this wasn't something we were going to work through. This wasn't a bump in the road or a rough patch or any of the other euphemisms people used when they didn't want to admit their marriage was over. "So what happens now?" she asked, and her voice was small and defeated. "Now? Now you get to live with the consequences of your choices. Now Clara gets to decide whether she wants to try to rebuild her marriage or start over. Now Victor gets to explain to his friends and family why his wife kicked him out. And now I get to figure out what the hell I'm supposed to do with the rest of my life." "And us?" she whispered. I looked at her standing there in our kitchen, this woman I'd loved and trusted and planned to grow old with, and felt absolutely nothing. No love, no anger, no sadness, just a kind of empty acceptance that this part of my life was over. "There is no us," I said. "There hasn't been an us since you decided Victor was more interesting than your husband." She started crying harder, but I was already walking toward the door. I had somewhere I needed to be, something I needed to do, and staying here listening to her try to justify the unjustifiable wasn't going to help either of us. "Where are you going?" she called after me. "To work," I said without turning around. Some of us still have responsibilities to people who actually trust us. I grabbed my keys and walked out, leaving her standing in our kitchen with her tears and her regrets and her complete inability to understand that some things, once broken, can't be fixed. The truth was out now, for better or worse, and everyone involved was going to have to figure out how to live with it. The next few weeks were like living in some twisted version of Groundhog Day, except instead of Bill Murray trying to win over Andy McDowell, I had my cheating wife trying to convince me that our marriage was worth saving. Every morning I'd wake up hoping that maybe, just maybe, she'd come to her senses and realize that what she'd done was unforgivable. Instead, I got a daily dose of tears, apologies, and increasingly desperate attempts to rewrite history. It started the very next morning after our kitchen showdown. I came downstairs to find her sitting at the dining table with what looked like a carefully prepared speech written on a legal pad. Because apparently when your marriage is falling apart, you need talking points to remember why your husband should forgive you for carrying another man's baby. "I've been thinking all night," she said, looking up at me with eyes that were still red and puffy from crying. "About us, about our future, about how we can move past this." "Move past this," I repeated, pouring myself coffee and trying to pretend this was a normal Tuesday morning conversation. "You mean move past the part where you cheated on me, or move past the part where you're pregnant with someone else's kid?" because those seem like pretty big obstacles to just skip over. I know what I did was wrong, she said, reading from her notes like she was giving a presentation to the board of directors. I know I hurt you and betrayed your trust. But people make mistakes, and marriages survive infidelity all the time. We can get through this if we both want to. I sat down across from her, genuinely curious about what kind of mental gymnastics she'd performed to reach this conclusion. Okay, I'll bite. How exactly do you see this working? You give birth to Victor's baby, we pretend it's mine, and we all live happily ever after? The baby doesn't have to change anything, she said, and I swear she actually believed what she was saying. Plenty of couples raise children that aren't biologically related to both parents. Step families, adoption, sperm donors, it happens all the time. Those are completely different situations, and you know it. Those are planned arrangements between consenting adults, not the result of your wife getting knocked up by her best friend's husband during a girl's trip. She flinched but pressed on. The point is, biology doesn't make someone a father. Love does. Commitment does. You could be this baby's dad in every way that matters. I stared at her across the table, amazed by her ability to make the most selfish request in the world sound like some kind of noble sacrifice on my part. And what about Victor? Does he just disappear from the picture? Does he sign away his parental rights and pretend his kid doesn't exist? We haven't worked out all the details yet, she said, which was apparently code for, I'm making this up as I go along and hoping you're desperate enough to buy it. We? Who's we? Are you and Victor having planning sessions about how to manage your love child? No, she said quickly. I haven't talked to him since it happened. Clara made it very clear that any contact between us would result in legal action. That was interesting. I'd wondered how the other half of this disaster was handling their own marital implosion. Apparently, Clara wasn't messing around when it came to consequences. So let me get this straight, I said. You want me to forgive you for cheating, agree to raise another man's child as my own, and do all of this without any input from the actual biological father, who's currently persona non grata in his own marriage. Does that about sum up your master plan? I want us to try, she said, and her voice was getting that pleading quality that meant she was about to start crying again. I want us to go to counseling and work through this and come out stronger on the other side. Stronger? I laughed, and it came out sounding harsh and bitter. Marissa, you didn't just cheat on me. You didn't just have a meaningless one-night stand that we could potentially work through with enough therapy and time. You created a permanent reminder of your betrayal. Every time I look at that kid, I'm going to remember what you did. Every birthday party, every Christmas morning, every school play, I'm going to be thinking about how you chose someone else over me. She was crying now, ugly sobs that shook her whole body. But it was just one night. One stupid, drunken mistake that I regret more than anything I've ever done in my life. A mistake that's going to last for 18 years. A mistake that's going to grow up and call me daddy while looking exactly like the man who destroyed our marriage. You don't know what the baby will look like, she said weakly. Come on, Marissa. Victor's got those dark eyes and that Mediterranean complexion. If this kid comes out looking anything like him, everyone's going to know the truth anyway. Did you really think you could pass off a little Victor clone as mine? She didn't answer, which was answer enough. She'd been hoping for a miracle, some genetic lottery that would let her pretend this whole situation never happened. Over the next few days, the begging intensified. She started leaving little notes around the house, in my briefcase, taped to the bathroom mirror, stuck to the steering wheel of my car. They all said variations of the same thing. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. We can work through this. I love you. It was like being haunted by the ghost of our marriage, except the ghost was very much alive and making my morning coffee routine really annoying. She tried the romantic approach, cooking elaborate dinners that she barely touched while staring at me across the table with hopeful eyes. She tried the practical approach, making lists of all the reasons why staying together made financial sense. She even tried the guilt approach, suggesting that divorcing her while she was pregnant made me the bad guy in this situation. Everyone's going to think you abandoned me in my time of need, she said one evening while I was trying to watch the news in peace. Let them think whatever they want, I said without looking away from the TV. Anyone who knows the truth will understand why I left. But what about people who don't know? What about your coworkers, your family, our friends? They're going to think you're a monster for leaving your pregnant wife. Are you seriously trying to guilt me into staying married to you because you're worried about what people will think? I'm trying to point out that divorce isn't going to solve anything. You're still going to have to deal with the gossip and the judgment and the awkwardness. At least if we stay together, we can control the narrative. Control the narrative. Like our marriage was some kind of PR campaign that needed better messaging. Like the problem wasn't what she'd done, but how other people perceived what she'd done. You know what? I said, finally looking at her. You're right. People are going to talk. They're going to speculate and gossip and probably come up with theories that are even worse than the truth. But you know what they're not going to do? They're not going to have to wake up every morning next to someone who betrayed them. They're not going to have to pretend to love a child that represents the worst moment of their marriage. They're not going to have to spend the rest of their lives wondering when it might happen again. It won't happen again, she said desperately. I swear to you, nothing like this will ever happen again. You're right, I said, standing up and heading for the stairs. Because I'm not going to give you the chance. I'd already started looking at apartments online, checking my finances, and mentally preparing for the conversation with a divorce lawyer. I just hadn't told her yet, because some small part of me was curious to see how far she'd go to try to save something that was already dead. The answer, apparently, was pretty far. Because the next morning I found her in the kitchen with pregnancy brochures spread across the table, talking about how we could take parenting classes together and pick out nursery furniture and plan for our future as a family. Our future, as if we had one. As if I was going to spend the next 18 years pretending to be grateful for the opportunity to raise her lover's child. That's when I knew it was time to put us both out of our misery and end this charade once and for all. There's something weirdly liberating about making a decision that you know is going to hurt like hell, but also set you free. It's like finally deciding to get a root canal. You know it's going to suck, but at least the constant pain will stop. That's exactly how I felt the morning I decided to pull the trigger on divorce papers instead of listening to another one of Marissa's speeches about second chances and the healing power of love. I'd spent the weekend apartment hunting, which was about as depressing as it sounds. Turns out that when you're a middle-aged insurance adjuster looking for a place to live after your wife destroys your marriage, your options are pretty limited. I could afford either a decent apartment in a sketchy neighborhood or a crappy apartment in a decent neighborhood, but not both. I went with decent neighborhood and crappy apartment because at my age, I figured I needed all the safety I could get. The place I settled on was a one-bedroom unit in a complex that looked like it had been built during the Carter administration and hadn't been updated since. The carpet was beige, the appliances were harvest gold, and the bathroom had the kind of shower that made you feel like you were being misted rather than actually cleaned. But it was mine, or would be mine once I signed the lease and figured out how to tell my wife that I was leaving. Monday morning, I called in sick to work, which wasn't technically a lie, because the thought of going to the office and pretending everything was normal made me physically nauseous. Instead, I drove to the law office of Mitchell & Associates, which specialized in divorce cases and had decent reviews on Google. Because apparently that's how people choose lawyers these days, the same way they pick restaurants and plumbers. Robert Mitchell turned out to be exactly what you'd expect from a divorce attorney. Sharp suit, sharper attitude, and the kind of handshake that let you know he'd seen every variation of marital disaster imaginable. He listened to my story without judgment, took notes on a legal pad that probably cost more than my monthly car payment, and gave me the kind of straightforward advice that I'd been hoping for. This is pretty cut and dried, he said, leaning back in his leather chair. Adultery is still grounds for divorce in this state, and pregnancy by another man certainly qualifies as irreconcilable differences. The question is, what do you want to walk away with? My dignity, I said, and as little drama as possible. He smiled, and it wasn't a particularly warm expression. In my experience, men who say they want as little drama as possible usually end up getting screwed in the settlement. Are you sure you don't want to fight for half the house, alimony, pain and suffering? I just want out, I told him. She can have the house, the furniture, the wedding china we never use, all of it. I don't want anything that reminds me of this marriage. What about the pregnancy? Do you want to establish paternity? Make sure you're not on the hook for child support. That was a conversation I'd been dreading, but it had to happen. The baby isn't mine. I want that clearly established in the divorce decree so there's no confusion later. He made more notes, probably calculating his fee based on how complicated this was going to get. We'll need DNA testing once the child is born, assuming the biological father is willing to cooperate. If not, we can compel testing through the courts. He'll cooperate, I said. His wife already kicked him out. I don't think he's in a position to make demands. After 2 hours of paperwork and legal strategy, I walked out of that office feeling like I'd just bought my freedom for the cost of a small car. It was expensive, but some things are worth paying for, and peace of mind was definitely one of them. That evening, I sat Marissa down for what I knew would be our last real conversation as husband and wife. She must have sensed something was different, because she'd spent the day cleaning the house and cooking my favorite dinner, like she was trying to remind me of all the domestic bliss I'd be giving up. "We need to talk," I said, and I saw her face immediately shift into panic mode. "If this is about the baby again, I already told you that we can work through this. There are support groups for couples dealing with infidelity, and I found this counselor who specializes in." "I want a divorce," I said, cutting her off before she could launch into another prepared speech about the healing power of professional therapy. The words hung in the air between us like a death sentence. She just stared at me for a long moment, her mouth slightly open, like she couldn't quite process what I'd said. "You don't mean that," she said finally. "You're angry, and you have every right to be, but divorce isn't the answer. We can fix this." "No, we can't," I said, and I was surprised by how calm my voice sounded. "Some things can't be fixed, Marissa. Some mistakes are too big to come back from." "But I love you," she said, and she started crying again. "I made a terrible mistake, but I love you, and that has to count for something." "It does count for something," I said. "It makes this harder than it needs to be. But love isn't enough to fix what you broke." She tried everything she could think of in the next hour. She cried, she bargained, she promised to do anything I wanted if I'd just give her another chance. She offered to cut off all contact with Clara and Victor, to move to another city, to go to church, to get individual therapy, couples therapy, family therapy. She painted pictures of the life we could have together, the family we could build, the happiness we could find if I'd just forgive her. But I'd already checked out emotionally. I sat there listening to her plead for our marriage while mentally calculating how many boxes I'd need to pack my stuff and wondering if the cable company would let me transfer service to my new apartment. "I've already filed the papers," I told her when she finally ran out of steam. "And I've put a deposit down on an apartment. I'm moving out this weekend." "This weekend?" She looked genuinely shocked, like she'd thought we'd spend months talking this to death before anything actually happened. "There's no point in dragging this out," I said. "We both know how this ends." She started crying harder, the kind of desperate sobs that made me feel like a monster for not comforting her. But I'd learned the hard way that comforting Marissa just encouraged her to think there was still hope, and false hope was crueler than honest rejection. "What about our friends?" she asked. "What about your family? What are we going to tell everyone?" "We're going to tell them the truth," I said. "You had an affair, you got pregnant, and our marriage couldn't survive it. Simple as that. People are going to judge me," she said. "They're going to think I'm a terrible person." "Some probably will," I agreed. "But that's not my problem anymore." I spent the rest of the week packing my life into cardboard boxes, sorting through 8 years of marriage, and deciding what was worth keeping and what belonged to a version of myself that no longer existed. It was surprisingly easy to walk away from most of it. The wedding photos, the anniversary gifts, the furniture we'd picked out together, it all felt like artifacts from someone else's life. Saturday morning, I loaded the last box into my car and stood in the driveway looking at the house where I'd thought I'd grow old with the woman I loved. It looked smaller somehow, less significant, like it was already becoming just another building instead of the center of my world. Marissa watched me from the kitchen window, and for a moment I felt a flicker of the old sympathy. She looked lost and broken, like a little girl whose parents had just told her they were getting divorced. But then I remembered what she'd done, what she'd chosen, and the sympathy faded. She'd made her bed, literally and figuratively. Now she could lie in it. I got in my car and drove away without looking back. Because sometimes the only way to save yourself is to walk away from everything you thought you wanted and start over with nothing but your self-respect intact. 6 months. That's how long it's been since I packed my life into cardboard boxes and drove away from the house where I thought I'd spend the rest of my life. 6 months since I traded a king-sized bed for a lumpy futon, a 2-car garage for a parking spot that's approximately the size of a postage stamp, and a marriage for a studio apartment that smells faintly of the previous tenant's cooking experiments. And you know what? Best trade I ever made. Don't get me wrong, the first few weeks were rough. Really rough. There's something deeply humbling about being a grown man eating cereal for dinner 3 nights in a row because you never learned how to cook for one person. There's something even more humbling about calling your mother to ask how to separate whites from colors in the laundry because your wife always handled that stuff and you'd apparently been sleepwalking through the domestic responsibilities of adult life. But slowly, gradually, I started to figure things out. I learned that grocery shopping for one person is actually kind of liberating. No more arguments about brand names or whether we really need the expensive organic vegetables. I discovered that having complete control over the TV remote is worth approximately 3 months of relationship counseling. And I found out that silence, real silence, is one of the most underrated luxuries in the world. No more walking on eggshells, waiting for the next emotional breakdown about how sorry she was. No more pretending that forgiveness was just around the corner if we could just find the right combination of therapy and time. No more looking at my wife and seeing a stranger who'd traded our future for one night with someone else's husband. The divorce was finalized last month, and it was about as anticlimactic as legal proceedings get. Marissa had given up fighting for reconciliation somewhere around month 3, probably right around the time she realized that begging someone to take you back only works if they still love you. By the end, we were both just ready to sign the papers and move on with our separate lives. She kept the house, just like I'd wanted. I kept my dignity, just like I'd planned. Fair trade, in my opinion. I hear things through the grapevine sometimes. This city isn't big enough to completely avoid news about your ex-wife, especially when she's carrying what is apparently a very obvious not your baby. Clara and Victor's divorce was finalized about a month before ours, and from what I understand, it was significantly messier. Apparently, when you're splitting assets worth millions of dollars instead of fighting over who gets the good coffee maker, lawyers get a lot more creative with their billable hours. Clara reached out to me a few times in those first couple of months. We met for coffee twice, 2 broken people trying to make sense of how quickly our lives had imploded. She was angry in a way that I recognized, that cold, focused fury that comes when someone you trusted completely betrays you in the most personal way possible. We didn't talk much about specifics, mostly just sat there drinking overpriced lattes and marveling at how naive we'd been. I keep thinking about all the signs I missed, she told me during our second coffee meeting. All the times he was working late, or taking business trips that seemed unnecessary, or just being distant. I thought he was stressed about work. I had no idea he was planning to cheat on me with my best friend. To be fair, I said, I don't think it was planned. I think they're both just selfish people who made selfish choices when the opportunity presented itself. Does that make it better or worse? She asked. I honestly don't know, I told her. Some days I think it would be easier if it had been planned, because then at least I could hate them both without reservation. The fact that it was supposedly spontaneous just makes them seem pathetic instead of evil. We stopped meeting after that, not because of any drama or falling out, but because we realized we were both just picking at wounds that needed to heal. She had her own rebuilding to do, and so did I. Staying connected to the wreckage of our old lives wasn't helping either of us move forward. I heard she moved to Seattle last month. Fresh start, new city, new life. Good for her. She deserved better than what she got from Victor, just like I deserved better than what I got from Marissa. The baby was born 3 weeks ago. A boy, apparently. I know this because my mother, bless her heart, still talks to Marissa's mother, and the gossip network between them is more efficient than any intelligence agency. Dark hair, dark eyes, looks nothing like me and everything like his actual father. No surprises there. Marissa tried to put my name on the birth certificate anyway, which resulted in a very expensive legal battle that ended exactly the way you'd expect, with DNA evidence proving what we all already knew. Victor is the father, legally and biologically, which means he gets to pay child support while dealing with his own custody arrangements. Marissa gets to be a single mother with a baby that serves as a permanent reminder of the worst decision she ever made. And I get to wake up every morning in my crappy little apartment, make my coffee exactly the way I like it, and not have to pretend that any of this is my problem anymore. The funny thing is, people expected me to be bitter. Coworkers, friends, Even my own family kept waiting for me to have some kind of breakdown or revenge fantasy. They wanted me to be angry, to plot elaborate schemes to make Marissa's life miserable, to spend my energy trying to get back at her for what she'd done. But here's the thing I learned during those 6 months of rebuilding my life from scratch. Revenge is exhausting. Staying angry takes work. Plotting and scheming and trying to hurt someone who already hurt you is just another way of letting them control your life. And I was done letting Marissa control anything about my existence. Instead, I focused on the one thing I could actually control, myself. I started going to the gym because apparently stress and rage are excellent motivators for getting in shape. I took a cooking class because eating cereal for dinner loses its charm after the first month. I even started dating again, though that's a whole other adventure that involves learning how to explain your divorce without sounding like a complete disaster. The truth is, I'm happier now than I was during those last few months of my marriage. I'm definitely happier than I would have been if I'd stayed and tried to make it work with a woman who'd proven she couldn't be trusted with the most basic requirements of marriage, like not sleeping with other people. I see Marissa sometimes around town. She looks tired, like single motherhood isn't the glorious adventure she might have imagined. She's gained weight, which isn't surprising considering she's dealing with a newborn and no support system. Most of her old friends have distanced themselves from the drama, and Clara's exile apparently extended to anyone who remained loyal to the woman who betrayed her. She doesn't look happy, but she doesn't look like my problem anymore, either. Last week, she sent me a text message. Just 3 words. I miss you. I stared at that message for about 30 seconds, then deleted it without responding. Because there was nothing to say. Missing someone and regretting your choices aren't the same thing as deserving a second chance. And even if she truly regretted what she'd done, even if she'd learned from her mistakes and become a better person, it didn't change the fundamental truth of our situation. She'd shown me who she really was when the chips were down, and I'd chosen to believe her. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. Some trust, once broken, can't be repaired. Some marriages, once destroyed by betrayal and lies and babies that belong to other men, can't be saved by good intentions and wishful thinking. But some things, like self-respect, like dignity, like the knowledge that you did the right thing even when it was hard, those things are worth more than any marriage built on a foundation of lies. I kept my self-respect. Everything else was just stuff.